In this video, we're breaking down 3 hours of all the lost episodes of South Park. Let's get started. South Park has been on the air since August 13th, 1997. 28 seasons, 338 episodes. It is one of the longest-running animated series in American television history, and it has built its reputation on saying the things that nobody else will say. The show has mocked every religion, every political party, every celebrity, and every social movement with equal enthusiasm. Trey Parker and Matt Stone, the creators of the show, have spent nearly 3 decades proving that nothing is off-limits. But that's not entirely true, because there are episodes of South Park that you cannot watch, not because they were never made, not because they were lost in some archive fire. They exist. They were written, animated, voiced, and broadcast on television. Millions of people saw them when they first aired. But today, if you open Paramount Plus, or if you go to the official South Park Studios website, or if you search on any major streaming platform, you will not find them. They have been pulled, removed, erased from the lineup. 5 episodes in total are consistently missing from every major streaming service. They were left out of the HBO Max deal, which was estimated at over $500 million. They were not included when the show moved to Paramount Plus. They are not on Hulu. They are not available for individual purchase on most digital storefronts. If you want to watch them legally, your only real option is tracking down old DVD box sets. Beyond the missing 5, other episodes triggered some of the most intense controversies in television history. One of them got the entire South Park franchise banned in China. Every episode, every clip, every online discussion scrubbed from the Chinese internet overnight. Another one led to credible death threats against Parker and Stone from a radical organization, with the New York City Police Department increasing security at Comedy Central's headquarters. Another caused the departure of one of the show's most beloved cast members, and it took nearly 20 years for the truth about that departure to come out. Tonight, we're going through all of them, every lost episode, every banned scene, every controversy. From the episode that aired without a single complaint and then vanished 9 years later, to the one that made the creators of South Park genuinely fear for their lives. Settle in. This is going to take a while. First up, we have the episode that started it all. And to understand why 5 episodes of South Park are missing from streaming, we need to go back to July 4th, 2001, Independence Day. The day South Park aired an episode featuring the Prophet Muhammad as a superhero, and nobody cared. The episode is called Super Best Friends. It is the 3rd episode of the 5th season, and it originally aired on Comedy Central on July 4th, 2001. The episode was written by Trey Parker, and like every episode of South Park, it carries a TVMA rating. At the time it aired, it was just another episode. A good one. Funny, weird, exactly what fans expected from the show. But there was nothing about it that suggested it would one day become one of the most controversial pieces of media in the history of American television. Nothing about it hinted that it would be pulled from every streaming platform, removed from the official website, and effectively erased from the show's current lineup. When it aired in 2001, it was just episode 68 of an animated comedy about 4 kids in Colorado. Here's what happens in the episode. A street magician named David Blaine comes to South Park. This is based on the real David Blaine, who was famous at the time for performing street magic and endurance stunts. In the episode, Blaine performs his magic tricks for the residents of South Park, and everyone is amazed. The boys, Stan, Kyle, Cartman, and Kenny, are among the people dazzled by his performances. Blaine invites them to attend one of his camps, which costs $69.95. It seems harmless at first, like a fun outing. But the camp turns out to be a front for a cult that Blaine has developed. The cult is called Blaintology, which is a clear reference to Scientology. The followers view Blaine as a messianic figure and refer to all of his tricks as miracles. Stan joins the Blaintologists along with the other boys, but it does not take long for Stan to become uncomfortable. He is creeped out by the cult-like atmosphere and wants to leave. He tries to convince Kyle to come with him, but Kyle refuses. Kyle has bought into the whole thing. He tells Stan that if Stan cannot accept his new religion, then they are not friends anymore. Stan, rejected by his best friend, leaves the camp alone. After nearly being run over by a pair of aggressive Blaintologists on the street, Stan goes to the one person he thinks might be able to help. In the world of South Park, Jesus Christ is an actual resident of the town. He He lives there. He has his own cable-access television show. Stan goes to Jesus and explains what's happening with David Blaine and the cult. Meanwhile, Blaine holds a massive show in Denver. The arena is packed with Blaintologists and curious newcomers. Jesus shows up to challenge Blaine directly. He performs one of his famous miracles, the loaves and fishes. But in typical South Park fashion, the miracle is underwhelming. Jesus has to ask everyone in the audience to turn around while he does it, and the result is not impressive. Blaine, on the other hand, performs genuinely spectacular tricks that win over the crowd. Jesus is outmatched. Realizing he cannot defeat Blaine alone, Jesus makes a decision. He calls the super best friends. This is where the episode gets into the territory that would later make it so controversial. The Super Best Friends are a team of religious figures presented as a parody of the Super Friends cartoon. The team includes Jesus, Krishna, Joseph Smith, Lao Tzu, Buddha, Moses, and a fictional character called Seaman, who is basically an Aquaman parody. But the team also includes Muhammad, the Prophet Muhammad. He is depicted as a regular member of the team with a specific superpower. Muhammad has the ability to control fire. He can shoot flames from his hands, and that is it. Muhammad is treated the same as every other member of the group. He has lines of dialogue, he participates in the action, he helps fight the bad guys. There is no special commentary about his inclusion, there is no disclaimer, there is no attempt to be provocative specifically about Muhammad. He is just one member of a superhero team made up of religious figures. Buddha is on the team too, so is Joseph Smith, the founder of Mormonism, so is Krishna. The joke is that all of these major religious figures have formed a Justice League-style team to fight evil. Muhammad is part of that joke, but he is not singled out. Back to the plot. The Blaintologists, now a massive organization, petition the government for tax-exempt status, PAF, which would make them an official religion. When they are denied, Blaine tells all of his followers to commit mass suicide in Washington, D.C. Kyle, who is still a member of the cult, finally realizes that the whole thing is dangerous. He tries to convince Cartman that they need to escape, but Kyle is imprisoned in a glass bubble and told he will be killed as part of the mass suicide. The Blaintologists begin drowning themselves in the reflecting pool in Washington, which is only about a foot deep. The absurdity is intentional. A hose begins filling Kyle's prison with water. Things look grim. The super best friends arrive to stop Blaine, but Blaine uses his powers to bring the Abraham Lincoln statue to life. The giant stone Lincoln rampages through Washington. To counter this, the super best friends build a giant stone John Wilkes Booth. Muhammad uses his fire powers to help in the battle. The giant Booth defeats the giant Lincoln. The super best friends save the day. Kyle is rescued. The cult is disbanded. The episode ends with Stan and Kyle reuniting. Kyle thanks Stan for saving him. Stan says Kyle is his super best friend. Kyle says Stan is his super best friend too. Cartman makes fun of them for being sentimental, and both Stan and Kyle kick him. The end. That is the entire episode. Muhammad appears. He uses fire powers. He helps fight a giant Abraham Lincoln. Nobody complains. And this is the part that matters for understanding everything that comes later. When Super Best Friends aired on July 4th, 2001, there was virtually zero controversy surrounding Muhammad's appearance. None. The episode ran on Comedy Central without any edits, without any disclaimers, and without any complaints from religious groups or advocacy organizations. It was reviewed by critics as just another South Park episode. It went into regular syndication and was rerun on Comedy Central for years. Muhammad was not even limited to this one appearance. After Super Best Friends aired, the character continued to show up in the show in small ways. In the opening crowd shot that played before every episode during Season 6, Muhammad is visible standing among the South Park residents, completely uncensored. In the Season 6 episode Bebe's Boobs Destroy Society, a lunchbox is shown with the Super Best Friends on it, and Muhammad is visible right there on the lunchbox alongside Jesus and Buddha. He also appeared in background crowd shots in episodes all the way through Season 12. For years, Muhammad was just a recurring background character in South Park, and nobody said a word about it. This is important context. The depiction of Muhammad on South Park was not some shocking provocation dreamed up to generate outrage. It was a creative choice made in 2001 that went completely unnoticed. The character appeared multiple times over several years. It was normal. It was unremarkable. It was part of the show. So what changed? On September 30th, 2005, a Danish newspaper called Jyllands-Posten published 12 editorial cartoons depicting the Prophet Muhammad. The cartoons were commissioned as a test of self-censorship and were intended to contribute to the debate about criticism of Islam and the limits of free speech. The publication of these cartoons triggered a global firestorm. Protests erupted in Muslim-majority countries around the world. Danish embassies were attacked. Boycotts were organized against Danish products. People died in the violence that followed. The controversy lasted for months and fundamentally changed the way Western media approached the depiction of Muhammad. Before the Jyllands-Posten cartoons, depicting Muhammad in media was not widely understood as a significant taboo in Western countries. The prohibition against visual depictions of Muhammad comes from certain interpretations of the Hadith texts in Islam, and while it has always been an important rule within the faith, it was not something that most Western media producers were aware of or worried about. After the Danish cartoon controversy, everything changed. The depiction of Muhammad became a flashpoint. Media organizations that might have once included Muhammad in a historical illustration or a satirical cartoon now refused to do so. The fear of violent retaliation was real and immediate. South Park had already depicted Muhammad multiple times without incident. But now, in a post-Jyllands-Posten world, that history became a liability. Trey Parker later described the moment he realized how the world had changed. He was on his honeymoon at Disney World. He turned on the television and saw thousands of rioting Muslims on the screen. The caption said something about Muslims being enraged over cartoons. Parker's immediate reaction was panic. He thought they had finally seen Super Best Friends. He thought the riots were about South Park. They were not. They were about the Danish cartoons. But the fact that Parker's first instinct was to assume his own show was the target tells you everything about how the landscape had shifted. For a few years after the Danish cartoon controversy, Super Best Friends continued to exist quietly. It was still in syndication. It was still available on the South Park Studios website. It was included on the DVD release of South Park's complete 5th season, which came out on February 22, 2005, before the Jyllands-Posten controversy even began. The episode was also included on the Blu-ray release of Season 5, which came out on December 5th, 2017. If you own either of those discs, you can still watch the episode today. But the storm was coming, it just had not arrived yet. In 2006, Parker and Stone created a 2-part episode called Cartoon Wars, which directly addressed the controversy about depicting Muhammad. We will get to that episode in detail shortly, and then, in 2010, they created their landmark 200th and 201st episodes, which attempted to bring Muhammad back on screen one more time. What happened after those episodes aired is one of the most significant censorship events in American television history, and it destroyed the quiet existence that Super Best Friends had enjoyed for nearly a decade. After the 200 and 201 controversy, which involved death threats, police protection, and Comedy Central censoring the episodes without the creators' consent, the network went back and pulled Super Best Friends as well. The logic was straightforward. Super Best Friends contained an uncensored depiction of Muhammad. In the current climate, that was considered too dangerous to keep available. The episode was removed from the South Park Studios website. It was pulled from syndication. When the show's streaming rights moved to Hulu, Super Best Friends was not included. When the massive deal with HBO Max was signed, estimated at over $500 million according to Deadline, Super Best Friends was one of 5 episodes excluded from the package. When the show moved to Paramount Plus, the same 5 episodes remained missing. As of 2026, Super Best Friends cannot be legally streamed anywhere. The 5 episodes that are consistently cited as removed from all major streaming platforms are Super Best Friends from Season 5, Cartoon Wars Part 1 and Cartoon Wars Part 2 from Season 10, and 200 and 201 from Season 14. All 5 episodes involve the depiction or discussion of the Prophet Muhammad. All 5 have been removed not because of anything wrong with the episodes themselves, but because of the real-world violence and threats that followed the broader controversy about depicting Muhammad in media. The situation with Super Best Friends is particularly striking because of how innocent the original broadcast was. This was not an episode designed to provoke. It was not an episode that set out to make a statement about Islam or censorship. It was a silly parody about David Blaine starting a cult and a team of religious superheroes saving the day. Muhammad happened to be one of those superheroes. For 9 years, that was fine. Then the world changed, and an episode that had caused no problems became too dangerous to keep available. The DVD and Blu-ray copies that were released before the ban still contain the episode. They are the only legal way to watch Super Best Friends today. International broadcasts varied by country, with some markets continuing to air the episode longer than the United States. But for the vast majority of South Park's audience, the episode has effectively disappeared. If you're watching South Park on Paramount Plus and you go through Season 5 episode by episode, you will notice that Episode 3 is simply missing. There is no placeholder, there is no message explaining why. The episode is just gone. You go from Episode 2 to Episode 4, and if you did not know Super Best Friends existed, you would never realize anything was missing. That is the first lost episode of South Park, an episode about David Blaine's cult and a superhero team of religious figures, including Muhammad, that aired without a single complaint on Independence Day in 2001, and then was quietly erased from the show's official lineup 9 years later because the world became a different place. Before we move on, make sure to subscribe if you're enjoying this breakdown. Super Best Friends aired without a single complaint. Muhammad had fire powers, turned into a beaver at one point during the fight scenes, and helped kill a giant stone Abraham Lincoln. Nobody cared. But 5 years later, South Park would try to show Muhammad again. And this time, the reaction would be very different. Moving on to the next pair of lost episodes. These are Cartoon Wars Part 1 and Cartoon Wars Part 2 from Season 10. They are episodes 3 and 4 of that season, and they aired on April 5th and April 12th, 2006. These episodes are 2 of the 5 that remain missing from all major streaming platforms. And while Super Best Friends was an episode that caused no controversy when it aired and was only pulled years later, Cartoon Wars was different. Cartoon Wars was designed to be controversial from the very beginning. It was Parker and Stone deliberately testing Comedy Central's willingness to let them do their jobs. To understand why Parker and Stone made these episodes, you need to understand where their heads were in early 2006. The Jyllands-Posten cartoon controversy had been raging for months. The Danish newspaper had published cartoons of Muhammad in September 2005, and by early 2006, the backlash was worldwide. People were dying in protests, embassies were being burned, Western media organizations were retreating. Newspapers that would have normally reprinted the cartoons as part of their news coverage were refusing to show them. Television networks were avoiding any visual depiction of Muhammad. The entire Western media apparatus was, in Parker and Stone's view, surrendering to the threat of violence. And Parker and Stone knew something that most people did not. They had already shown Muhammad on television. 5 years earlier in Super Best Friends, Muhammad was on screen, uncensored, with fire powers fighting a giant Abraham Lincoln. Nobody had complained. Nobody had threatened anyone. The episode had aired and gone into regular rotation without incident. So from their perspective, the situation was absurd. They had done the thing that everyone was now afraid to do, and nothing bad had happened. The fear was not based on their own experience. It was based on what had happened to someone else in a different country, in a different context. And yet Comedy Central, their own network, was telling them they could no longer depict Muhammad on the show. The same network that had aired Super Best Friends without hesitation in 2001 was now refusing to allow any image of Muhammad to appear in any form. Parker and Stone decided to make this contradiction the subject of an episode. Actually, they decided to make it the subject of 2 episodes, a 2-part story that would directly address the censorship they were experiencing while simultaneously mocking another animated show that they had long held in contempt. Here's what happens in Cartoon Wars Part 1. The town of South Park goes into a panic after a news report claims that the Fox animated show Family Guy is about to air an episode that shows the Prophet Muhammad. The residents are terrified. They believe that if the episode airs, there will be a terrorist attack on their town. People are hysterical. Everyone rushes to the community center for safety. The next morning, it is revealed that the Fox network censored Muhammad at the last minute. Family Guy aired the episode, but they covered Muhammad's image. The town breathes a sigh of relief. But then another announcement comes. The episode featuring Muhammad was actually part 1 of a two-parter, and the second half will be showing Muhammad completely uncensored. A terrorist video surfaces threatening the United States if the episode airs. The town descends into panic again. This is where the main character's motivations diverge. Cartman decides to travel to the Fox network headquarters in Los Angeles to get the episode pulled. He presents himself as being motivated by respect for Muslim people and their religious sensibilities. Kyle is initially skeptical of Cartman's motives, but after having a nightmare in which South Park is attacked by terrorists and his little brother Ike is killed in a bombing, Kyle decides that maybe Cartman is right. Maybe it is better to pull the episode for the greater good. He decides to go with Cartman on the trip to Fox. Meanwhile, back in South Park, the town holds a meeting at City Hall to discuss what to do. One resident, Stephen Stotch, who is Butter's father, gives a stirring speech about standing up for free speech and not giving in to terrorism. It is actually a pretty good speech. But then Randy Marsh, Stan's father, says he likes a different idea better. The alternative plan is for everyone to bury their heads in the sand, literally, to demonstrate that they did not watch, hear, or support the Family Guy episode. Despite Stephen's passionate defense of free speech, the town votes for the sand idea. Stan tries to point out that this is incredibly stupid. Randy scolds him and tells him to bury his head. On the road, Cartman and Kyle are traveling on Big Wheels, the children's tricycles. Cartman eventually lets it slip that he does not actually want to get the Family Guy episode pulled. He wants to get the entire show canceled. Kyle is confused. Why would Cartman care about Family Guy being canceled? Cartman explains his true motivation, and this is where the episode becomes a meta-commentary on South Park itself. Cartman says that everyone is always comparing his sense of humor to Family Guy's humor. People say Cartman's jokes are just like the random cutaway gags that Family Guy uses. This infuriates Cartman because he believes his humor is different. He says that when he makes jokes, they are inherent to the story. They are deep, emotional jokes based on what is relevant and has a point. Family Guy, in Cartman's view, just strings together one interchangeable joke after another with no connection to the plot. This is, of course, Trey Parker and Matt Stone speaking through Cartman. Parker and Stone have been vocal about their dislike of Family Guy's humor style. They believe that South Park's comedy comes from character and story, while Family Guy relies on random non-sequiturs. By having Cartman articulate this argument, they are simultaneously mocking Family Guy and acknowledging that some viewers see similarities between the two shows. Kyle realizes that Cartman does not care about Muslim people or religious sensitivity. He used the fear of terrorism as a tool to pursue his own petty agenda. Kyle tries to stop him. A chase scene follows, with Cartman and Kyle racing their big wheels. Cartman manages to force Kyle off the road using cheesy poofs. Kyle's tricycle goes off a cliff and somehow explodes. Cartman rides away laughing. The episode also includes a subplot involving President George Bush meeting with the president of the Fox network. Bush tries to get the Fox president to pull the Family Guy episode. The Fox president says he cannot do it, and then tells Bush there is something he needs to know about the writers of Family Guy. This sets up a reveal that comes in part 2. The episode ends on a cliffhanger with the Family Guy episode still scheduled to air, Cartman heading to Fox headquarters, Kyle trying to recover, and the town of South Park with their heads buried in sand. Now, Cartoon Wars Part 2. This aired 1 week later on April 12, 2006. The episode opens with a fake announcement saying that Part 2 will not be shown tonight and that a Terrence and Phillip episode will air in its place. This is itself a reference to a notorious moment in South Park history. Back in Season 2, the show had teased a major revelation about Cartman's father in a cliffhanger, and then aired a Terrence and Phillip April Fool's episode instead of the resolution, which enraged fans. In this fake-out, the Terrence and Phillip episode features Muhammad, who is censored. Terrence and Phillip then go to the Canadian Broadcasting Corporation, demanding the episode be rerun with Muhammad uncensored. The CBC explains there are new rules about censorship. The actual Cartoon Wars Part 2 follows Cartman arriving at Fox Studios. He goes to the reception desk and asks to speak with the Fox executives about pulling the Family Guy episode. The receptionist tells him to wait. In the waiting area, Cartman encounters a kid who looks exactly like Bart Simpson. This is a sly dig at The Simpsons, suggesting that even Bart would want Family Guy canceled. Cartman tells Bart about how he once tricked a kid into eating his own parents, the Scott Tenorman incident from season 5. Bart is impressed and lets Cartman handle things. Kyle, meanwhile, reaches a diner on his journey, but everyone in the diner has their heads buried in sand. A man with a gun approaches Kyle and demands to know why his head is not buried. The big reveal about the Family Guy writers comes in this episode. It turns out that the writers of Family Guy are actually manatees, literal sea creatures. They live in a tank at Fox Studios, and they create episodes by pushing idea balls through a tube. Each ball has a random subject, celebrity, or event written on it. Whatever combination of balls the manatees push through becomes the next cutaway gag in a Family Guy episode. This is Parker and Stone's most vicious critique of Family Guy. They are saying that the show's humor is so random and disconnected from story that it could literally be generated by animals pushing balls around. The critical scene in the episode involves what actually airs on Family Guy. When the episode finally broadcasts, Muhammad is shown. But in the actual South Park episode as it aired on Comedy Central, Muhammad's image is covered by a black censorship bar. This was not Parker and Stone's creative choice. This was Comedy Central's decision. The network refused to allow Muhammad to be shown on screen, even within the context of a satirical storyline about censorship. Parker and Stone responded to this by including a deliberate test. Immediately after the censored Muhammad scene, the Family Guy episode within the South Park episode shows a scene where Jesus Christ defecates on President Bush and the American flag. This scene was shown uncensored. Parker and Stone's point was brutally clear. Comedy Central would allow Jesus to be depicted in a degrading and offensive way, but they would not allow Muhammad to be shown at all. The double standard was the entire argument. At the end of the episode, Kyle gives a speech about how freedom of speech means protecting all speech, even speech that offends people. If you start making exceptions, if you agree that some subjects are too sensitive to satirize, then you give power to anyone willing to threaten violence. The person willing to be the most extreme gets to decide what everyone else can say. Kyle argues that this is wrong and that the only way to preserve free speech is to apply it equally to everyone and everything. The Cartoon Wars episodes were nominated for a Primetime Emmy Award. They were critically praised for their commentary on censorship and free speech, but they were also ultimately examples of the very censorship they were criticizing. Comedy Central would not let Parker and Stone show Muhammad. The black censorship bar in Part 2 was real. It was the network overriding the creators. Trey Parker spoke about the experience in several interviews. He described it as Comedy Central telling them they were not going to broadcast a Muhammad episode. Parker and Stone responded by saying they understood it was the network's right to make that call, but they were going to make the episode anyway, and it would be one of the 7 episodes the network was paying for that season. Parker also described the deeper frustration. He pointed out that they had already shown Muhammad in Super Best Friends in 2001. That episode had aired without incident. Nothing bad had happened. The fear that now prevented them from depicting Muhammad was not based on their own experience. It was based on what had happened to other people in other countries. And yet that fear was enough to censor their show. The irony of Cartoon Wars is that the episodes were both a critique of censorship and a product of censorship at the same time. Parker and Stone wanted to show Muhammad. Comedy Central said no. So Parker and Stone made episodes about how Comedy Central was saying no, and Comedy Central still said no. The black bar stayed, Muhammad remained unseen. Today, both Cartoon Wars Part 1 and Cartoon Wars Part 2 are among the 5 episodes missing from all major streaming platforms. They were removed from the HBO Max deal. They are not on Paramount Plus. They were pulled from the South Park Studios website. Like Super Best Friends, they can still be found on DVD releases from before the ban. The complete 10th season DVD includes both episodes. But for streaming audiences, they are gone. The situation is particularly strange because the Cartoon Wars episodes do not actually show Muhammad. The censorship bar was in the original broadcast. There is no uncensored version of these episodes in which Muhammad's image appears. The only thing these episodes contain is a discussion about whether Muhammad should be shown and a critique of the decision not to show him. They were pulled from streaming not because they depict Muhammad, but because they are about the controversy surrounding his depiction. This is the second and third of the 5 lost episodes. 2 episodes about the censorship of Muhammad that were themselves censored and then eventually removed entirely. Parker and Stone tested Comedy Central's limits with Cartoon Wars. They lost that battle. But 4 years later, for their landmark 200th episode, they decided to try one more time. And this time, the consequences went far beyond a network censorship bar. This time, people threatened to kill them. Before we move on, make sure to subscribe if you're enjoying this breakdown. Now we arrive at the episodes that changed everything, not just for South Park, but for the conversation about free speech, censorship, and violence in America. These are episodes 200 and 201, the 5th and 6th episodes of Season 14. Episode 200 aired on April 14, 2010. Episode 201 aired 1 week later on April 21, 2010. Together, they represent the single most significant censorship event in the history of American animated television. And unlike Cartoon Wars, where the battle was between the show's creators and their network, the 200 and 201 controversy involved death threats from a radical organization, police protection for the creators, and a level of censorship that even Parker and Stone did not expect. To understand what Parker and Stone were trying to do with these episodes, you need to know that episode 200 was, as the title suggests, the show's 200th episode. It was a milestone. And Parker and Stone decided to celebrate that milestone by doing something ambitious. They wanted to revisit as many past storylines and controversies as possible, weaving them all together into a single new story. They wanted to bring back old characters, reference old jokes, and create what was essentially a greatest hits episode with a new plot holding it all together. The Muhammad storyline was part of that plan. Parker and Stone had been frustrated for years that Comedy Central would not let them depict Muhammad on the show. They had shown him in Super Best Friends in 2001 without any problems. They had tried again in Cartoon Wars in 2006 and been censored. Now for their 200th episode, they wanted to address the Muhammad issue one more time. But this time, they did it in a way that was deliberately designed to highlight the absurdity of the whole situation. Here's what happens in episode 200. Tom Cruise is working in a fudge factory in South Park. The boys see him and point out that Tom Cruise is packing fudge. This is a double entendre, obviously, and Cruise is furious about being mocked yet again. He decides that enough is enough. Cruise reaches out to every celebrity that South Park has ever made fun of over the course of the show's history, and he convinces them all to join a class action lawsuit against the town. The list of celebrities is enormous. It includes people like Kanye West, Rob Reiner, Mel Gibson, Steven Spielberg, Bono, Al Gore, Barbra Streisand, David Blaine, Paris Hilton, Michael Jefferson, the show's version of Michael Jackson, the Jonas Brothers, Jared Fogle, Tiger Woods, Phil Collins, Sally Struthers, and dozens of others. Every celebrity that had ever been mocked on South Park shows up, ready to sue. Tom Cruise presents the town with an ultimatum. The celebrities will drop the lawsuit on one condition. They want the town to bring them the Prophet Muhammad. Cruise claims he wants to meet Muhammad because he is a fan. But the real reason is more sinister, and it gets revealed fully in episode 201. The boys, Stan and Kyle in particular, go to the Super Best Friends for help. They ask if Muhammad can come to South Park to meet with the celebrities. The Super Best Friends discuss it, but they face a problem. In the current climate, Muhammad cannot be seen in public. His image cannot be shown. Even walking around with his body completely obscured is not acceptable. Eventually, they agree to let Muhammad travel to South Park, but only in the back of a U-Haul truck, where he can be heard but not seen. When Muhammad arrives in South Park, the celebrities demand he come out of the truck. The townspeople need to figure out how to present Muhammad to the celebrities without actually showing him. Their solution is to put Muhammad inside a bear mascot costume that covers him from head to toe. Muhammad walks around in this giant teddy bear suit. Meanwhile, there is a secondary plot involving Cartman, a character named Mitch Connor, who is actually just Cartman doing a voice with his hand drawn to look like a face, convinces Cartman that the townspeople have been lying to him about who his real father is. Years earlier, in seasons 1 and 2, the show had a major storyline about the identity of Cartman's father. The resolution was that Cartman's mother, Leon Cartman, was actually a hermaphrodite and was both his mother and his father. Mitch Connor tells Cartman that this was a lie and that someone at that time had altered the paternity test results. Just as the town is about to hand Muhammad over to the celebrities, a new threat emerges. The Ginger Kids, a group from a previous episode, show up and announce that they also want Muhammad. They threaten to blow up South Park if Muhammad is not given to them instead. Now the town is caught between two groups demanding Muhammad, and then Micah Streisand appears. This is a callback to a Season 1 episode in which Barbara Streisand transformed into a giant Godzilla-like monster. The celebrities have rebuilt Micah Streisand, and she begins destroying the town. The episode ends on a massive cliffhanger. The Gingers are about to blow up South Park. Micah Streisand is rampaging. The celebrities are demanding Muhammad. And Mr. Hat, the old puppet belonging to Mr. Garrison, is about to reveal the true identity of Cartman's father. To be continued. That was episode 200. It aired on April 14th, 2010. And within a week of the episode's original broadcast, everything went wrong. A New York-based organization called Revolution Muslim posted an entry on their website about the episode. The post, written by a man named Abu Talha al-Amriki, who was later identified as Zachary Chesser, included a warning to Trey Parker and Matt Stone. The post stated that they would probably end up like Theo van Gogh. Theo van Gogh was a Dutch filmmaker who was murdered in Amsterdam on November 2, 2004. Van Gogh had directed a short film called Submission, which criticized the treatment of women in Islam. He was shot and stabbed to death on the street by a radicalized individual. The killer pinned a note to Van Gogh's body with a knife, threatening others who criticized Islam. The Revolution Muslim post included a photo of Van Gogh's murdered body. It also included the addresses of Comedy Central's New York offices and South Park Studios in Los Angeles. The post contained audio clips from a sermon by Anwar al-Awlaki, an al-Qaeda imam, calling for the assassination of anyone who defamed Muhammad. Al-Awlaki said that harming Allah and his messenger was reason enough for Muslims to kill whoever did it. While the people behind Revolution Muslim claimed they were issuing a warning rather than a direct threat, multiple media outlets and law enforcement officials interpreted the post as a threat. The organization operated out of New York City, and its members were American citizens who lived openly in the United States while supporting extremist ideologies on their website. The New York City Police Department took the threat seriously. They increased security at Comedy Central's headquarters in New York in direct response to the Revolution Muslim post. Law enforcement officials said they believed Revolution Muslim was all talk and had never actually engaged in violence themselves, but they were concerned that the website post could inspire violence from others. The fear was not that Revolution Muslim would attack Parker and Stone directly. The fear was that someone else, someone who saw the post and felt motivated to act, could carry out an attack. Zachary Chesser, the man who wrote the post, was later arrested on unrelated charges. In 2010, he was sentenced to 25 years in federal prison. The charges included communicating threats and attempting to provide material support to Al-Shabaab, a terrorist organization operating in Somalia. The fallout from the Revolution Muslim post shaped everything that happened with episode 201. Episode 201 aired on April 21, 2010, exactly 1 week after episode 200. Before the episode even broadcast, Parker and Stone submitted their final cut to Comedy Central. What happened next was something they did not expect. Here's what happens in the plot of episode 201. The story picks up from the cliffhanger. The Gingers demand to see Muhammad to prove that South Park actually has him. They unzip the bear costume, but it is not Muhammad inside, it is Santa Claus. Stan explains that they promised Jesus that Muhammad would stay hidden in the U-Haul, and they put Santa in the suit as a decoy. Before anyone can resolve this, Micah Streisand appears and begins destroying South Park. The giant Barbara Streisand monster rampages through the town, crushing buildings and killing several characters, including Pip, a minor character who had been part of the show since season 1. Pip tries to reason with Micah Streisand, and she simply steps on him. The super best friends try to come up with a plan to stop Micah Streisand. Meanwhile, Buddha is shown snorting cocaine and Jesus is watching pornography. These depictions of other religious figures are shown completely uncensored and without any controversy. This was deliberate on Parker and Stone's part. They wanted to highlight the double standard. You could show Buddha doing drugs, you could show Jesus watching porn, but you could not show Muhammad doing anything at all. The super best friends eventually defeat Mecha Streisand by having Krishna transform into Neil Diamond and performing a duet with her, which calms her down. This is a callback to the original Mecha Streisand episode from Season 1. In the Cartman subplot, the truth about his father is finally revealed. Scott Tenorman, the kid from the infamous Season 5 episode Scott Tenorman Must Die, returns. In that original episode, Cartman had tricked Scott Tenorman into eating chili, made from his own parents. It was widely considered the darkest moment in South Park history and the defining moment for Cartman as a character. Scott Tenorman reveals to Cartman that his real father was Jack Tenorman, one of the Denver Broncos. This means that Jack Tenorman was Scott Tenorman's father as well, which means Cartman had his own father killed and then fed him to his own half-brother. The town had covered up the truth to protect Cartman. This revelation is devastating in the context of the show's history, but it was largely overshadowed by the Muhammad controversy. The episode's climax involves the Gingers, the celebrities, and the townspeople all fighting over Muhammad. The celebrities want Muhammad's goo, a substance that supposedly makes him immune to ridicule. Tom Cruise believes that if he can obtain this goo, nobody will ever be able to make fun of him again. The episode ends with 3 monologues delivered by Kyle, Jesus, and Santa Claus. These speeches were intended to be the moral of the story. They were Parker and Stone's direct statement about everything they had experienced over the past several years of being censored. Kyle's speech says that throughout the whole ordeal, everyone wanted to show things they were not allowed to show, but the power preventing them was not magic. It was the threat of violence. The only true power, Kyle says, is threatening people with violence. Jesus follows up by saying that if the Gingers do not want to be made fun of anymore, all they need are guns and bombs to get people to stop. Santa adds that all you need to do is instill fear and be willing to hurt people, and you can get whatever you want. The only true power is violence. This was the intended message of the episode. It was not subtle. Parker and Stone were saying, as directly as they possibly could, that Comedy Central had taught them that violence works. If you threaten people, they will do what you want. The censorship of Muhammad on South Park was not happening because of reasoned debate or religious sensitivity. It was happening because people had threatened to kill anyone who depicted Muhammad, and that threat had been effective. But here is what actually aired. When episode 201 broadcast on April 21, 2010, the version that viewers saw was dramatically different from what Parker and Stone had submitted. Comedy Central had made changes to the episode that Parker and Stone did not authorize and did not expect. Every single reference to Muhammad's name was obscured by an audio bleep. In episode 200, which had aired the week before, Muhammad's name was spoken freely. Characters said his name without any censorship. But in 201, every instance of the name Muhammad was bleeped out with a loud electronic tone. It was not a subtle edit, it was jarring and disruptive. But the censorship went far beyond just bleeping the name. The monologues at the end of the episode, the speeches by Kyle, Jesus, and Santa Claus about how violence is the only true power, were almost entirely bleeped. Nearly 2 full minutes of dialogue were rendered completely incomprehensible. Kyle would start talking and then the bleep would kick in, drowning out everything he said. Jesus would begin his speech and the bleep would cover it. Santa would try to make his point and the bleep would erase his words. The viewer at home heard almost nothing of the intended moral of the story. Both episodes, 200 and 201, also used a black censorship bar to obscure any visual that appeared to be Muhammad. This visual censorship was present in both episodes as they aired. In every scene where Muhammad was supposedly present, a black bar reading "censored" covered the relevant area of the screen. Immediately after episode 201 finished airing, the South Park Studios website posted a notice. The message informed fans that Comedy Central had inserted numerous additional bleeps throughout the episode after Parker and Stone had submitted their final cut. The network later confirmed that they were responsible for the audio censorship. Parker and Stone had not bleeped the speeches. Comedy Central had done it unilaterally without the creators' approval. The next day, April 22, 2010, South Park Studios released a brief statement that became one of the most quoted responses in the history of the show. It read, in full, that in the 14 years they had been doing South Park, they had never done a show that they could not stand behind. They would have preferred to air the episode as they had originally intended, but they understood the decision Comedy Central made and respected their right to make it. That statement was measured and diplomatic, but the subtext was clear. Parker and Stone were furious. They had created an episode with a specific message about censorship and the power of threats, and Comedy Central had proven their point by censoring the very speech that made that argument. The episode about how threatening violence gets people to do what you want was itself altered because of a threat of violence. The cultural response was immediate and intense. Jon Stewart, the host of The Daily Show, which aired on Comedy Central just like South Park, devoted approximately 10 minutes of his April 22nd broadcast to the situation. Stewart expressed disgust at Revolution Muslim for making the threats. He criticized their hypocrisy, pointing out that they lived in the United States and enjoyed all the freedoms that American society provides, including freedom of speech, while simultaneously trying to silence others. Stewart's segment culminated in a song directed at Revolution Muslim, telling them to go perform an act on themselves that cannot be repeated here. Stewart also criticized Comedy Central's decision to alter the episode, while acknowledging that the network was probably trying to protect its employees from potential harm. Bill Maher, the host of Real Time with Bill Maher on HBO, weighed in as well. Maher said the threats against South Park served as a reminder that American culture is fundamentally different from, and better than, a culture that makes death threats over cartoons. He added, with his characteristic dark humor, that if people still wanted to kill someone over a stupid cartoon, they should make it Garfield. On April 27, 2010, 17 Pulitzer Prize-winning cartoonists released a petition condemning the threats against Parker and Stone. Among the signatories were Gary Trudeau, the creator of Doonesbury, Mark Fiore, Tony Auth, David Horsey, and Paul Sepp. The petition stated that they condemned the recent threats against the creators of South Park by the extremist organization, and that freedom of expression is a universal right. They rejected any group that seeks to silence people by violence or intimidation. Perhaps the most dramatic consequence of the 200 and 201 controversy was the story of Molly Norris. Norris was a cartoonist in Seattle who, inspired by the threats against Parker and Stone, proposed an event she called Everybody Draw Muhammad Day. She suggested that on May 20th, 2010, people across the internet should draw and publish pictures of Muhammad as a show of solidarity with South Park, and a stand against the idea that threats of violence should determine what people are allowed to create. The concept went viral. It spread far beyond what Norris had intended or anticipated. She eventually tried to distance herself from the event, but it was too late. The idea had taken on a life of its own. And then the threats began targeting Norris personally. Anwar al-Awlaki, the same al-Qaeda imam whose sermons had been quoted in the original Revolution Muslim post, issued a call for Norris's assassination. The threat was considered credible enough that the FBI advised Norris to go into hiding. She did. Molly Norris changed her name, moved to an undisclosed location, and effectively disappeared from public life. A Seattle cartoonist who had made a Facebook post in support of free speech had to erase her identity because of death threats from a terrorist organization. As of the last public reports, she had not returned to her former life. The Revolution Muslim website was eventually taken down. Zachary Chesser was arrested and sentenced to 25 years in federal prison. Another member of the group was also prosecuted, but the damage was done. The threats had achieved their intended effect. Comedy Central had censored the episode. The speeches about how violence is the only true power had been silenced, and 5 episodes of South Park were removed from circulation. The aftermath of 200 and 201 played out over the following years in several important ways. Neither episode has ever been rerun on Comedy Central. They aired once on April 14th and April 21st, 2010, and they have never been broadcast on the network again. Both episodes were pulled from the South Park Studios website and have never been restored. They are not available on the official South Park streaming portal. When South Park's streaming rights moved to Hulu, the episodes were not included. When the massive deal with HBO Max was signed, they were excluded. Former Comedy Central head Doug Herzog explained the decision to The Hollywood Reporter in 2016. He said they were protecting everyone who works at the company and that it was the decision they needed to make. The safety of employees came first. When the show moved to Paramount Plus, the episodes remained absent. As of 2026, neither 200 nor 201 is available on any streaming platform. The episode 200 was eventually released on DVD and Blu-ray as part of the complete 14th season set, which came out on April 26, 2011. The version of 200 on the home release is uncensored. Muhammad's name is not bleeped. This makes the DVD the only official release where 200 can be seen without the audio censorship. However, 201 was released on the same DVD set in its censored form. The bleeps remain. Kyle's speech, Jesus' speech, and Santa's speech are still largely inaudible. The uncensored version of 201 has never been officially released in any format. According to the Lost Media Wiki, the uncensored version of 201 exists somewhere in Comedy Central's archives, but it has never been made available to the public. During the commentary tracks recorded for the DVD release of both episodes, Parker and Stone are notably restrained. They never mention Muhammad by name in the commentary. They refer to him only as the prophet of the Muslim faith. This caution, even in a DVD commentary, speaks to the lasting impact of the threats. International broadcasters also struggled with the episodes. The Canadian Comedy Network aired 201 on April 25, 2010, but it used the same censored version as the American broadcast. This was notable because the Canadian network had previously aired every South Park episode completely uncensored. The Dutch version of Comedy Central declined to air either episode. The Swedish affiliate of Comedy Central also refused to broadcast 200 and 201, releasing a statement saying they valued creative freedom but that the safety of their employees was their number one priority. The 200 and 201 two-parter was, despite all of this, nominated for the Primetime Emmy Award for Outstanding Animated Program in 2010. The fact that an episode that had been censored by its own network and pulled from circulation was nominated for an Emmy is one of the stranger footnotes in television history. There was also a brief period of speculation that the Revolution Muslim Post may have been connected to a larger security threat. On May 1, 2010, about 10 days after 201 aired, a car bomb was discovered in Times Square in New York City. U.S. Congressman Peter T. King described one possible motive as the whole issue with South Park. However, the suspect, Faisal Shahzad, had been training for months before the South Park episodes aired, and the connection was never established. Revolution Muslim denied any involvement. NYPD Commissioner Raymond Kelly said the theory could not be ruled out, but media reports indicated the timing was coincidental. The legacy of 200 and 201 extends beyond the episodes themselves. As mentioned earlier, the controversy caused Comedy Central to go back and retroactively pull Super Best Friends from 2001. It caused the network to remove the Cartoon Wars episodes from streaming as well. 5 episodes in total were swept up in the aftermath. An entire arc of the show's history, spanning from 2001 to 2010, was effectively erased from the official lineup because of the threats that followed 200 and 201. Parker and Stone have spoken about the experience sparingly in the years since. They have not made another episode centered on Muhammad. They have not attempted to show his image again. Whether this is because they have moved on to other subjects or because the experience of receiving death threats genuinely changed their approach is something only they know. What is clear is that 200 and 201 proved the very point they were trying to make. The episodes argued that threatening violence is the most effective way to control what people say. Comedy Central's response to the threats proved that argument correct. The speeches about violence being the only true power were silenced by the threat of violence. The irony is so complete that it almost feels like fiction, but it is not. It is exactly what happened. Somewhere in Comedy Central's archives, the uncensored version of episode 201 sits. The full speeches by Kyle, Jesus, and Santa Claus, unbleeped and unedited, exist on a hard drive or a tape. The words that Parker and Stone wrote about how terrorizing people works, about how threatening violence is the only true power, about how the world has taught them that fear is more effective than reason, those words exist. They have just never been heard by the public as they were written, and that, more than anything else, is the story of South Park's lost episodes. Not lost because they were destroyed. Lost because the world decided they were too dangerous to exist in plain sight. Before we move on, make sure to subscribe if you're enjoying this breakdown. Those are the 5 missing episodes. Super Best Friends, Cartoon Wars Part 1, Cartoon Wars Part 2, 200, and 201. 5 episodes spanning nearly a decade of the show's history, all connected by a single thread, the depiction of one religious figure in an animated comedy. But the story of South Park's battles with censorship does not end there, not even close. Because the very next war was already being fought, and this one came from inside the show itself. Moving on to the episode that nearly brought the Church of Scientology to war with South Park. This is Trapped in the Closet, Season 9, Episode 12. It originally aired on Comedy Central in the United States on November 16, 2005. The episode was written and directed by Trey Parker, who credited himself under the pseudonym John Smith. That fake credit was itself a joke, a playful reference to the fact that Parker expected serious backlash from Scientology and was pretending to hide his identity. He was not actually hiding. Everyone knew who made South Park. Trapped in the Closet is one of the most acclaimed episodes in the entire run of the series. TV Guide ranked it number 17 on its list of TV's top 100 episodes of all time. Comedy Central included it in their own list of 10 South Parks that changed the world. It was nominated for a Primetime Emmy Award in July 2006. Unlike the Muhammad episodes, Trapped in the Closet has never been pulled from streaming. You can watch it right now on Paramount Plus. It airs in regular syndication. It has never been permanently censored or removed. But the story of what happened behind the scenes, both during and after the episode's production, is one of the most fascinating in the show's history. It involves a planned lawsuit that never happened, a rerun that was mysteriously canceled, and the departure of one of the show's most beloved voice actors under circumstances that would not be fully understood for nearly 20 years. Here's what happens in the episode. Stan Marsh is walking through South Park when he passes a group of Scientologists offering free personality tests on the street. Stan has nothing else to do, so he takes the test. After answering the questionnaire, Stan is informed that he is deeply depressed. The Scientologists tell him that Scientology can help with his depression and invite him to join the church. Stan figures that anything free and fun is worth trying, so he goes along with it. At the Scientology Center, Stan takes additional tests. His results are remarkable. Stan's thetan levels, which in Scientology refer to the spiritual state of a person, are off the charts. The Scientologists are stunned. They believe that Stan's readings are so high that he can only be one thing: the reincarnation of L. Ron Hubbard, the founder of the Church of Scientology. Word spreads rapidly through the Scientology community. Tom Cruise comes to Stan's house to meet the supposed reincarnation of Hubbard. Cruise asks Stan what he thinks of his acting. Stan, being an honest kid, tells Cruise that he thinks Cruise's acting is okay, but not as good as some other actors. He specifically mentions that he thinks Leonardo DiCaprio and the guy from Napoleon Dynamite are better. Cruise is devastated. He goes into Stan's bedroom closet and refuses to come out. This is the central visual gag of the episode. Tom Cruise is literally in the closet. Characters spend the rest of the episode trying to get Tom Cruise to come out of the closet. The double meaning is obvious and intentional. Every character keeps saying variations of "Tom Cruise, please come out of the closet," and "Why won't he come out of the closet?" And everyone knows he's in the closet. The joke never gets old in the episode because it is played with such commitment. R. Kelly shows up at Stan's house and demands to know what is going on in the closet. This is a reference to R. Kelly's real-life song and music video series called Trapped in the Closet, which was a multi-part R&B opera. Kelly starts singing his own version of the song about the current situation, narrating events as they unfold. Then R. Kelly also goes into the closet. John Travolta arrives and joins the growing crowd outside the closet. Travolta is also a well-known Scientologist in real life. He tries to convince Cruise to come out, but fails. Then Travolta goes into the closet too. While all of this is happening, Stan is attending Scientology sessions where they explain the church's beliefs to him. The episode presents a straightforward depiction of Scientology's creation story, the story of Xenu, the galactic dictator who brought billions of aliens to Earth 75 million years ago and killed them with hydrogen bombs near volcanoes. Their souls, called Thetans, then attached to living humans and caused spiritual harm. This account of Xenu is based on actual Scientology teachings that are normally only revealed to high-level members of the church. During this entire sequence, a text banner appears at the bottom of the screen that reads, "This is what Scientologists actually believe." On the official Comedy Central website for the episode, there is an additional note asserting that nothing about the portrayal was exaggerated in the slightest. Stan listens to the whole Xenu story and responds with confusion and disbelief. He points out that the whole thing sounds made up. The Scientologists are horrified. Stan tries to explain that he does not think he is the reincarnation of L. Ron Hubbard. He just wants everyone to calm down. The episode ends with Tom Cruise emerging from the closet and announcing that he and the entire Church of Scientology are going to sue Stan. Everyone else starts threatening to sue everyone else. The final scene is a cascade of characters saying, "I'll sue you," to each other. Stan turns to the camera and tells Scientology to go ahead and sue him. The credits then roll using fake names for the writers and producers, all listed as either Jane Smith or John Smith, as a joke about the legal threats. The episode was a massive ratings hit. It was critically praised. It won almost universal acclaim for its sharp writing and its willingness to directly take on one of the most litigious organizations in the world. But behind the scenes, things were more complicated. The day after Trapped in the Closet aired on November 17th, 2005, Mike Rinder, a high-ranking Scientology executive who has since left the organization, wrote a memo to David Miscavige, the leader of the Church of Scientology. The memo addressed the episode and what the church should do in response. The Scientologists considered suing Parker and Stone. They had lawyers look into it, but they quickly determined that their legal case was weak. The episode was clearly satire, and American law gives broad protections to satirical works, especially those targeting public figures and public organizations. Unable to pursue a legal strategy, the church attempted other approaches. They investigated journalists and consultants who had worked with the South Park production team, trying to find leverage. They accused a consultant of using the show to further his personal vendetta against Scientology. But none of these efforts bore much fruit. The consultant continued working with Comedy Central shows, including The Daily Show, without any pushback. The more visible consequence came a few months later. A rerun of Trapped in the Closet was scheduled to air on March 15th, 2006. It never aired. Instead, Comedy Central replaced it with Chef's Chocolate Salty Balls, a nearly 8-year-old episode. The network said the scheduling change was a tribute to Isaac Hayes, who had just announced his departure from the show, but many people suspected a different reason. Reports circulated that Tom Cruise had threatened to pull out a promotion for Mission Impossible 3, which was being distributed by Paramount, a sister company of Comedy Central within the Viacom corporate family. If Cruise refused to promote the film, it could cost the studio millions. The rerun was canceled. Comedy Central never confirmed the Tom Cruise theory. Cruise's publicist denied any involvement, but the timing was suspicious. The episode was pulled from the schedule on March 15th, and Isaac Hayes' departure was announced on March 13th. Whether the two events were connected or merely coincidental has been debated ever since. Now, the Isaac Hayes story. This is the part that took nearly 20 years to fully come to light. Isaac Hayes voiced the character of Chef on South Park from the show's very first episode in August 1997. Chef was one of the most beloved characters on the show. He was the school cafeteria worker at South Park Elementary, and he was the one adult in town who the boys could always turn to for advice. Chef's advice usually came in the form of songs, often with sexual content that went over the boys' heads. The character was warm, funny, and an essential part of the show's appeal. Hayes was a legendary musician in his own right. He won the Academy Award for Best Original Song for the theme from Shaft in 1971. He was inducted into the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame in 2002. He was one of the creative forces behind Stax Records, and had a career that spanned decades in music, acting, and voice work. Hayes was also a Scientologist. He had been involved with the Church of Scientology since the early 1990s, and he was a prominent member of the organization. For the first 8 seasons of South Park, Hayes had no public issue with the show's content. South Park mocked Christians, Muslims, Mormons, Jews, Buddhists, and every other religious group extensively. Hayes cashed his checks and continued voicing Chef. He appeared in interviews where he discussed the show positively and expressed pride in his work. Then Trapped in the Closet aired on November 16th, 2005, and everything changed. On March 13, 2006, a statement was issued in Hayes' name, announcing that he was leaving South Park. The statement said there was a place in this world for satire, but there was a time when satire ended and intolerance and bigotry towards the religious beliefs of others began. Hayes said he could not support a show that disrespected those beliefs and practices. Matt Stone responded sharply. He told the Associated Press that Hayes' complaint was 100% having to do with his faith of Scientology. Stone pointed out that Hayes had no problem and had cashed plenty of checks, with the show making fun of Christians, Muslims, Mormons, and Jews. Stone said that Hayes got a sudden case of religious sensitivity when it was his religion featured on the show. That was the public version of the story for years. Hayes quit because South Park made fun of Scientology, and Parker and Stone called him a hypocrite for it. It was a clean narrative, it made sense. But it was not the whole truth. The rest of the story came out slowly, over the course of nearly 2 decades. The most important revelation came from Hayes' own son, Isaac Hayes III. In 2016, Hayes III gave an interview to The Hollywood Reporter as part of an oral history of South Park celebrating the show's 20th anniversary. In that interview, Hayes III dropped a bombshell. He said his father did not quit South Park. Someone quit South Park for him. Hayes III explained what actually happened. In January 2006, approximately 2 months after Trapped in the Closet aired, Isaac Hayes suffered a stroke. The stroke left him unable to speak. He could not communicate effectively. He had to relearn how to play the piano and relearn many basic skills. He was in no condition to make major professional decisions. He was certainly not in a condition to write or approve a public statement about leaving a television show. But at the time, everyone around Isaac Hayes was a Scientologist. His assistants were Scientologists. His managers were Scientologists. His publicists were Scientologists. The core group of people who handled his affairs were all connected to the church. According to Hayes III, someone in that circle made the decision to pull Hayes from South Park and issued the statement in his name. Hayes did not write the statement. Hayes did not approve the statement. Hayes may not have even been fully aware that the statement had been issued. The language in the statement about satire ending where intolerance and bigotry begin was strikingly similar to language that the Church of Scientology itself had used in its own response to the episode. Many observers noted the similarity. Hayes III reinforced this account in July 2025, nearly 20 years after his father's departure from the show. He posted on social media saying that for over 14 years, people had speculated about why his father left South Park, and he was there to set the record straight. His father did not quit South Park. Scientology did. He explained that after Trapped in the Closet aired in 2005, his father suffered a stroke that left him unable to speak or make decisions on his own. The truth, Hayes III said, was that someone else within his father's Scientology circle made the decision and quit the show for him. Hayes III also did an interview with Cracked in 2025, where he provided additional detail. He said the people around his father at the time were largely Scientologists, and those decisions about his involvement in the show and his leaving the show were made by those people and not by him. Hayes III emphasized that his father would have never quit the show. He loved doing the show. He loved the character. He was making a lot of money from the show. The decision to leave did not come from Isaac Hayes. Matt Stone has confirmed this version of events. In the 2016 Hollywood Reporter piece, Stone said they sort of figured out the whole picture a bit later. But that is totally what happened. Stone also described a phone conversation he had with Hayes after Trapped in the Closet aired. Stone said it was pretty obvious from the conversation that somebody had sent Hayes to ask them to pull the episode. Hayes seemed uncomfortable. He was doing someone else's bidding. Roger Friedman of Fox News reported as early as March 2006, just days after the resignation statement was issued, that sources had told him Isaac Hayes did not quit South Park. Friedman wrote that someone quit it for him and that friends of Hayes in Memphis were mystified by the statement. Isaac Hayes never returned to South Park. He never had the opportunity to set the record straight himself. On August 10, 2008, Isaac Hayes died at the age of 65. The cause of death was a stroke, the same condition that had incapacitated him 2 years earlier. Parker and Stone responded to Hayes' departure with the Season 10 premiere, The Return of Chef, which aired on March 22, 2006, just 9 days after the resignation statement. In the episode, Chef returns to South Park after being away. but he has been brainwashed by an organization called the Super Adventure Club, which is a clear stand-in for Scientology. Chef's dialogue in the episode was created by cutting together audio from previous episodes, splicing old lines of dialogue into new and disturbing sentences. The result was intentionally unsettling. Chef sounded wrong. He sounded like a person who had been taken over by something. At the end of the episode, Chef dies in spectacularly violent fashion. He is struck by lightning, set on fire, impaled on a tree branch, shot, and then torn apart by animals. His face is ripped off. It is one of the most graphic character deaths in the show's history. The other characters mourn him, and Kyle gives a brief speech saying they should not be mad at Chef for what happened to him. They should be mad at the fruity little club that scrambled his brains. This was Parker and Stone's way of separating Isaac Hayes, the person, from the decision that was made on his behalf. They were not angry at Hayes, they were angry at Scientology. At the very end of the episode, the Super Adventure Club resurrects Chef as Darth Chef, a mechanical version of the character in the style of Darth Vader. This hinted that Chef could return someday, though he never did in any meaningful way. Parker and Stone later dedicated the 2008 episode The China Program to Hayes' memory after his passing. The dedication was a quiet acknowledgement that despite everything that had happened, they still cared about Hayes and respected his contribution to the show. The Trapped in the Closet saga is fundamentally different from the Muhammad episodes in one critical way. The Muhammad episodes were pulled from circulation and remain unavailable to this day. Trapped in the Closet was never permanently pulled. The rerun was canceled once in March 2006 under circumstances that remain disputed, but the episode has been in regular rotation ever since. You can watch it on Paramount Plus right now. Scientology ultimately failed to suppress the episode. The Catholic League, which we will discuss shortly, also failed to suppress an episode. The only censorship that succeeded permanently was the censorship motivated by the threat of lethal violence. That distinction matters. It is the difference between an organization filing a complaint and an organization saying you will probably end up dead. The complaint did not work. The death threat did. Before we move on, make sure to subscribe if you're enjoying this breakdown. Scientology could not destroy South Park. The threats against Parker and Stone over Muhammad did not stop them from making the show. But in 2019, South Park would pick a fight with something much bigger than a church or an extremist group. They picked a fight with the government of the most populous country on Earth. And this time, the consequences were not about individual episodes being pulled. This time, an entire country erased South Park from existence. The episode is called Banned in China. It is the second episode of season 23, and it aired on Comedy Central on October 2nd, 2019. The title is a pun. It sounds like Banned in China, which is exactly what happened. Here is the full story of what happens in the episode. The episode follows two parallel storylines. In the first, Randy Marsh, Stan's father, travels to China to expand his marijuana business, Tegrity Farms. The Tegrity Farms storyline had been running since season 22, with Randy becoming increasingly obsessed with his weed-growing operation. Randy sees China as a massive, untapped market. He packs up his marijuana and heads overseas. When Randy arrives in China, things go badly almost immediately. He is arrested when the marijuana is discovered in his luggage and is sent to a labor camp. The camp is depicted as a re-education facility, similar to the real-world camps that China has been criticized for operating. Inside the camp, Randy encounters two unexpected prisoners, Winnie the Pooh and Piglet. This is a reference to a real-world situation. Starting around 2013, a meme began spreading across the Chinese internet comparing Chinese President Xi Jinping to Winnie the Pooh. The comparison was based on physical similarities, specifically that Xi was perceived as having a similar body type and facial expression to the cartoon bear. The meme continued to grow in popularity over the years, and it apparently did not please Xi Jinping. China began censoring references to Winnie the Pooh online. In 2018, the film Christopher Robin, which is a Disney adaptation of the Winnie the Pooh stories, was denied a release in China. The ban on Winnie the Pooh became one of the most widely discussed examples of Chinese government censorship in Western media. In the South Park episode, Pooh and Piglet are shown imprisoned in the labor camp because of the Xi Jinping comparison. Randy, ever the opportunist, tries to figure out how to still sell his marijuana in China despite being in a labor camp. He remains laser-focused on the business opportunity even as he witnesses the harsh conditions of the facility. Randy eventually gets out of the labor camp and teams up with Mickey Mouse. This is the same Mickey Mouse character that South Park has used before, a foul-mouthed, ruthless corporate operator who represents Disney's business interests above all else. Mickey and Randy go to the Chinese government to pitch the idea of selling Integrity Farms marijuana in the Chinese market. But there is a problem. The Chinese officials are unhappy because of the Winnie the Pooh situation. Xi Jinping does not want to do business with anyone connected to Disney because Disney owns Winnie the Pooh, and Pooh has become a symbol of mockery toward Xi. Mickey Mouse explains the problem to Randy. The Pooh issue is blocking the deal. Randy's solution is horrifying and played for dark comedy. He uses a pot of honey to lure Winnie the Pooh into a secluded alley. While Pooh happily eats the honey, oblivious to what is happening, Randy strangles him to death. Piglet watches in horror from around the corner. The scene is brutal and deliberately shocking, even by South Park standards. It is meant to represent the lengths that Western businesses are willing to go to in order to access the Chinese market. If China says Winnie the Pooh is a problem, a ruthless businessman like Randy will literally kill Winnie the Pooh to close the deal. The second storyline follows Stan Marsh. Stan forms a death metal band called Crimson Dawn with his friends Jimmy, Kenny, and Butters. The band gains enough attention to attract a music producer who wants to make a biopic about them, in the style of recent music biopics like Bohemian Rhapsody and Rocket Man. Stan is excited about the project, but immediately problems emerge. The producer explains that for the movie to make money, it needs to clear the Chinese censors. He tells Stan that the film cannot mention the Dalai Lama, homosexuality, organ transplants, or Winnie the Pooh. These are all real topics that China has restricted or banned from films released in the country. As filming begins, the censorship becomes increasingly invasive. Chinese government officials appear on set to approve the content. They stand over Stan's shoulder as he writes, erasing passages they disapprove of. The film is being rewritten in real time to conform to Chinese government standards. The producer keeps asking Stan to make changes, and each change makes the film less honest and less interesting. Stan eventually delivers a line that became one of the most quoted moments from the episode. He says they live in a time when the only movies that American kids go see are the ones that are approved by China. By the end of the episode, Stan makes a decision. He refuses to compromise his art for the Chinese market. He tells the other that no matter how badly he wants to succeed, he cannot bring himself to sell out to China, and anyone who does is worthless. Meanwhile, Randy has successfully murdered Winnie the Pooh, and the Chinese marijuana deal goes through. A dump truck delivers a load of cash to Integrity Farms. Stan asks Randy why he is covered in honey and blood. Randy admits he killed Pooh. Stan calmly leaves the table to write another song about his father. The episode is a savage critique of how Western entertainment companies, including Disney, the NBA, and major Hollywood studios, alter their content to avoid offending the Chinese government in order to access the lucrative Chinese market. The episode aired on October 2, 2019, the day after the 70th anniversary of the founding of the People's Republic of China. Though it is not clear if this timing was intentional, China's response was swift and total. Within days of the episode's airing, the Chinese government enacted what can only be described as a blanket ban on the entire South Park franchise. This was not about one episode, this was about everything. Every clip of South Park was removed from Chinese streaming services, including Youku, which is one of the largest video platforms in China. Every discussion about South Park was scrubbed from Baidu, China's dominant search engine. All South Park threads were deleted from Douban, Zhihu, and Bilibili, which are major discussion and content platforms. Mentions of South Park were removed from Sina Weibo and WeChat, China's two most important social media platforms. The Hollywood Reporter was the first major outlet to report the scrubbing on October 7, 2019. They described it as virtually every clip, episode, and online discussion of South Park being wiped from the Chinese internet. If you were in China and you tried to access the former South Park discussion thread on Baidu's Tiba platform, which is China's largest online discussion forum, you would see a message reading that according to the relevant law and regulation, this section is temporarily not open. The ban was comprehensive in a way that few Western media bans have been. It was not just the offending episode that was removed, it was the entire show, all 23 seasons, all clips, all fan discussions, everything. South Park was effectively erased from the Chinese internet. Parker and Stone responded on October 7, 2019, with what became one of the most viral statements in the history of entertainment. They posted on the official South Park Twitter account a mock apology to China. The statement read, "Like the NBA, we welcome the Chinese censors into our homes and into our hearts. We too love money more than freedom and democracy. She doesn't look just like Winnie the Pooh at all." Tune into our 300th episode this Wednesday at 10. Long live the great Communist Party of China. May this autumn's sorghum harvest be bountiful. We good now, China? The reference to the NBA was pointed and timely. Just days earlier, Daryl Morey, the general manager of the Houston Rockets, had posted a tweet supporting the pro-democracy protests in Hong Kong. China had responded by pulling NBA games from Chinese television and cutting ties with the Rockets. The NBA had scrambled to apologize and distance itself from Morey's statement. Parker and Stone were mocking the NBA's capitulation by sarcastically adopting the same posture. The statement went massively viral. It was covered by every major news outlet in the world: CNN, CBS News, the BBC, Variety. The Hollywood Reporter, Newsweek, and dozens of other publications ran stories about the ban and Parker and Stone's response. The statement became a symbol of defiance against Chinese censorship and was widely praised by free speech advocates. The ban also had some unexpected effects. Hong Kong protesters, who were in the midst of months-long demonstrations against the mainland Chinese government's growing influence over Hong Kong's autonomy, began playing the Banned in China episode in public across the city. The episode became a rallying symbol for the protest movement. Apple, which has a significant portion of its manufacturing operations in China and a large user base in the country, was reportedly unlikely to bid for the streaming rights to South Park due to the China ban. Bloomberg News reported in October 2019 that Apple had concerns about the show's relationship with China. This was notable because at the time, streaming platforms were competing aggressively for content, and South Park was one of the most valuable animated properties in television. The China ban potentially affected not just the show's availability in China, but its business prospects in the West as well. A professor at the U.S. Air Force Academy, Jahara Matasek, published an article in the Modern War Institute praising the episode. Matasek described it as an important moment in the information warfare between the United States and China. He argued that the episode demarcated an American shift in political and cultural pushback against China's attempts to impose authoritarian standards on the rest of the world. The Chinese ban on South Park remains in effect as of 2026. The entire franchise is still unavailable on the Chinese internet. However, Banned in China itself is freely available on all Western streaming platforms. You can watch it on Paramount Plus on the South Park Studios website and through any standard streaming package that includes South Park. Unlike the Muhammad episodes, which were pulled by Comedy Central, Banned in China was never removed from Western distribution. The ban was imposed by a foreign government, not by the show's own network. This distinction is important. When Comedy Central pulled the Muhammad episodes, the censorship came from within. The network that paid for and aired the show made the decision to remove it. When China banned South Park, the censorship came from outside. An authoritarian government decided that the show was unacceptable and erased it from the internet within its borders. Parker and Stone had no control over either situation, but the nature of the censorship was fundamentally different. One was a business decision made under duress by their own partners. The other was a state action by a government that does not recognize the concept of free speech. Interestingly, South Park video games remained available in China even after the ban. South Park, The Stick of Truth, and South Park, The Fractured But Whole could still be downloaded from the Steam shop in China. The soundtrack of South Park, Bigger, Longer, and Uncut could also be found on some platforms. The ban appears to have targeted the television show specifically while leaving some peripheral South Park content untouched, at least initially. Banned in China represents the largest geographic scope of any South Park controversy. The Muhammad episodes were pulled from specific platforms by specific companies. The Scientology controversy affected one voice actor and one canceled rerun. But banned in China triggered a response from a national government with jurisdiction over 1.4 billion people. An entire country decided that South Park could not exist within its borders because of a single episode of a cartoon. And Parker and Stone's response? They laughed about it. They issued a sarcastic, fake apology. They kept making the show. They moved on to the next episode. That attitude, more than anything else, defines what South Park has been for nearly 3 decades. No amount of pressure from networks, from churches, from terrorist organizations, or from national governments has made Parker and Stone change what they do. They have been told to stop countless times. They have never stopped. Before we move on, make sure to subscribe if you're enjoying this breakdown. China banned the entire show. Scientology tried to take it down from the inside. Extremists threatened murder over a cartoon. And through all of it, South Park kept going. But these are not the only episodes with troubled histories. Some controversies were quieter, but no less bizarre. Moving on to the episode that put South Park at war with the Catholic Church. This is Bloody Mary, Season 9, Episode 14. It was the season finale of Season 9, and it originally aired on December 7th, 2005. That date is important because it was just 3 weeks after Trapped in the Closet aired on November 16th, 2005. In the span of less than a month, South Park managed to anger both the Church of Scientology and the Catholic Church. That takes a special kind of commitment. Here's what happens in the episode. Randy Marsh gets pulled over for driving under the influence and is arrested for a DUI. As part of his sentence, he is ordered to attend Alcoholics Anonymous meetings. At the meetings, Randy is told that alcoholism is a disease and that he is powerless against it. He can only overcome his addiction through a higher power. Randy, being Randy, takes this to an extreme. He begins using a wheelchair because he considers himself too sick to walk. He starts behaving like a severely ill person, despite the fact that his only issue is that he drinks too much beer. Meanwhile, a statue of the Virgin Mary at a nearby church appears to be bleeding. This is presented as a miracle. The blood seems to be coming from the statue's rear end. Crowds of people flock to the church, believing the blood has healing properties. People with various ailments come to be healed by the miraculous bleeding statue. Randy hears about the statue and believes it can cure his alcoholism. He travels to the church and the bleeding statue sprays blood on him. Randy is overjoyed. He believes he has been cured. He throws away his wheelchair and declares that the miracle has freed him from his disease. Then the Pope arrives. In the episode, Pope Benedict XVI comes to South Park to evaluate the miraculous statue. He examines it closely. After careful inspection, the Pope announces his finding. The statue is not bleeding from its rear end. It is menstruating. The blood is coming from a different orifice. The Pope declares that a woman having her period is not a miracle. It is a normal biological function. He dismisses the miracle and leaves. Randy is devastated because the miracle has been declared invalid. Stan steps in with the actual moral of the episode. Stan tells his father that alcoholism is not something you can cure with a miracle or a 12-step program. It requires personal responsibility. You have to choose not to drink. It is about self-control, not about some external force curing you. Randy, chastened, agrees to take responsibility for his own behavior. The Catholic League for Religious and Civil Rights, led by William Donahue, launched a major campaign against the episode. They found the depiction of the Virgin Mary menstruating on the Pope to be deeply offensive. They demanded that Comedy Central pull the episode from their lineup permanently. They pressured the network through public statements, media campaigns, and complaints. The campaign achieved a partial victory. A rerun of Bloody Mary that was scheduled for December 28, 2005, just 3 weeks after the original broadcast, was canceled. The Catholic League took public credit for the cancellation. They treated it as a significant win. But it was only a temporary victory. Unlike the Muhammad episodes, which were pulled permanently, Bloody Mary returned to regular circulation. The episode airs in syndication today. It is available on Paramount Plus. It is available on the South Park Studios website. It was included on DVD and Blu-ray releases. The Catholic League's campaign successfully canceled one rerun, but it failed to get the episode permanently removed. This outcome illustrates a pattern that runs through all of South Park's controversies. Organizations that filed complaints, organized campaigns, and used institutional pressure to try to suppress episodes universally failed. The Catholic League failed with Bloody Mary. Scientology failed with Trapped in the Closet. The only censorship that has been permanently effective was the censorship backed by the threat of lethal violence, which was the Muhammad episodes. The Catholic Church and the Church of Scientology are powerful institutions with significant resources, but neither of them could permanently suppress a South Park episode. Revolution Muslim, a small radical group operating a website from New York City, succeeded where those institutions failed, because Revolution Muslim's message carried the implicit promise that people might die. That is the uncomfortable truth at the heart of South Park's censorship history. Complaints do not work, campaigns do not work, institutional pressure does not work, threats of violence work. And that is exactly the point Kyle, Jesus, and Santa Claus tried to make in their censored speeches at the end of episode 201. Now let us talk about some of the other boundary-pushing moments in South Park's history that resulted in bans, censorship, or controversy on a smaller scale. One of the most famous episodes in the show's entire run is It Hits the Fan, the first episode of Season 5. It originally aired on June 20th, 2001, about 2 weeks before Super Best Friends. The premise of the episode is straightforward. A character on the fictional television show Cop Drama says the word shit, uncensored for the first time on network television. This was inspired by a real event. In the early 2000s, the word shit was first used uncensored on American network television, which was a significant milestone in broadcast standards. The South Park episode takes this premise and runs with it in the most absurd way possible. The word shit is used uncensored 162 times in a single 22-minute episode. A counter appears in the corner of the screen, tracking each usage as it happens. The word is used by every character in the show. It appears in dialogue, in song lyrics, in background signage, and in voiceover narration. By the end of the episode, the sheer volume of usage has become the joke itself. The episode was a commentary on the arbitrary nature of broadcast standards. The argument Parker and Stone were making was that words only have the power that we give them. By saying shit 162 times, they were essentially desensitizing the audience to the word and proving that it was just a sound. The more you hear it, the less offensive it becomes. The episode also contained an elaborate subplot involving a plague that was released every time the word was spoken, as if profanity could literally poison society. It Hits the Fan was considered shocking at the time. It generated significant media coverage and debate about language on television. But unlike the episodes we have discussed so far, it was never pulled from circulation. It was never censored. It was never banned. You can watch it right now on Paramount Plus, complete with all 162 uses of the word. The episode has become a fan favorite and is frequently cited in discussions about censorship in media. The contrast between It Hits the Fan and the Muhammad episodes is instructive. South Park said shit 162 times and nobody tried to take the episode away. South Park showed Muhammad with fire powers and 5 episodes were pulled from every streaming service. The difference is not about the content, it is about who was offended and what they were willing to do about it. Moving beyond individual episodes, South Park has faced censorship on a national level in several countries. India banned the entire South Park series in 2010. The ban was enacted by India's Ministry of Broadcasting, which cited extreme vulgarity as the reason. This was not a ban on specific episodes, it was a ban on the entire show. South Park was simply not available in India through any legal channel. The ban remained in effect for nearly a decade. It was not until 2019 that South Park became available in India again when Netflix India acquired the streaming rights. The show was given an 18+ rating, which restricted it to adult viewers. The fact that it took 9 years for South Park to return to India illustrates how lasting these bans can be. An entire generation of Indian viewers missed the show during what many fans consider its peak creative period. South Park has also been banned outright in several other countries, though the full list is not always publicly documented. The show carries a TVMA rating in the United States, making it one of the most restricted shows on American television. It was the first weekly television program to receive the TVMA rating when it premiered in 1997. Some syndicated reruns air with a slightly less restrictive TV-14 rating, depending on the specific episode and the time slot. The show's video games have also faced censorship issues. South Park. The Stick of Truth, released in 2014, was initially banned in Australia. The ban was related to two specific gameplay sequences. One involved an interactive scene in which the player character is subjected to an alien anal probe. The other involved an interactive mini-game related to abortion. The Australian Classification Board determined that both sequences exceeded what was acceptable for video games in Australia. A censored version of the game was released for the Australian market. Instead of showing the offending scenes, the game displayed a text description of what was happening on a still image of a crying koala. European and Israeli versions of the game used similar censorship, but with a European flag instead of the koala. In a twist that perfectly captures Parker and Stone's sensibility, they reportedly found the censored descriptions funnier than the original scenes. The text descriptions were dry, clinical accounts of what was happening in the gameplay, written in a matter-of-fact tone that made the absurd content even more absurd. Some players who played both versions actually preferred the censored version because the text descriptions were so unexpectedly hilarious. South Park: The Fractured But Whole. The sequel, released in 2017, also faced some regional content adjustments, though the situation was less dramatic than the outright ban of the first game. The video game censorship is worth mentioning because it illustrates how South Park's controversies extend beyond the television show itself. The franchise as a whole has been a lightning rod for debate about content standards, censorship, and the limits of free expression across multiple media. Now let us talk about an episode that represents a different kind of controversy, one that did not involve banning or censorship but is worth mentioning because of how it sits in the show's recent history. In August 2025, Season 27, Episode 2, titled Gotta Nut, aired on Comedy Central. The episode featured a parody of right-wing media figures, with Cartman imitating a character who bore resemblance to real-life conservative activist Charlie Kirk. The episode showed Cartman using debate tactics similar to those associated with Kirk and similar media personalities. On September 10, 2025, approximately 5 weeks after the episode first aired, Charlie Kirk was fatally shot while giving a talk at Utah Valley University. In the immediate aftermath of Kirk's death, Comedy Central pulled Gotta Nut from its cable rerun schedule. The episode was removed from the network's rotation as a gesture of sensitivity following the real-world tragedy. However, unlike the Muhammad episodes, Gotta Nut was not pulled from streaming. The episode remained available on Paramount Plus throughout the period when it was off the cable schedule. This meant that anyone who wanted to watch the episode could still do so through the streaming platform. The cable pull was a temporary measure of respect, not a permanent censorship action. This situation echoed what happened during the early days of the COVID-19 pandemic, when television networks pulled episodes of various shows that dealt with disease, quarantine, or pandemic themes. It was a sensitivity decision, not a content decision. The episode itself was not deemed inappropriate. The timing simply made it uncomfortable to air on cable television in the immediate aftermath of a related real-world event. The South Park franchise has generated an extraordinary amount of controversy over its nearly 3 decades on the air. The show has been protested by religious groups, banned by national governments, targeted by terrorist organizations, and censored by its own network. It has survived all of it. The show is currently renewed through at least 2029 or 2030, thanks to a deal worth $1.5 billion that Trey Parker and Matt Stone signed with Paramount Global in July 2025. That deal guarantees 50 new episodes at a rate of approximately 10 per year. As of December 2025, South Park has aired 338 episodes across 28 seasons. It remains one of the most watched animated programs on television. Season 27, which aired in the summer of 2025, saw its premiere episode draw 5.9 million cross-platform viewers in its first 3 days. The second episode of that season, Gotta Nut, drew approximately 6.2 million cross-platform viewers, making it the most-watched South Park episode since 2018. The show that was supposed to be a passing fad in 1997 has outlasted most of its critics, most of its controversies, and most of the people who have tried to shut it down. and it shows no signs of stopping. Before we move on, make sure to subscribe if you're enjoying this breakdown. South Park has been banned in countries, censored on its own network, and scrubbed from the internet by a superpower. But there is one more story worth telling tonight. It is not about what got banned, it is about what almost never existed in the first place. To understand how South Park became the kind of show that could survive death threats, government bans, and institutional warfare, you need to understand where it came from. Because South Park did not start as a television show, it started as a Christmas card. And the fact that it exists at all is one of the strangest origin stories in television history. In 1992, a college student at the University of Colorado named Trey Parker made a short film for his animation class. The film was called Jesus vs. Frosty, and it was made using crude construction paper cutout animation. The short featured 4 boys who looked like early versions of the South Park characters, though they did not have the same names yet. In the short, the boys build a snowman who comes to life as an evil Frosty the Snowman and goes on a killing spree. One of the boys is killed by the snowman, and the other boys call out, "Oh my God, Frosty killed Kenny." Jesus Christ then shows up and defeats the evil snowman using a magical halo. That is where the DNA of South Park was formed. Crude animation, foul-mouthed children, Kenny dying, Jesus appearing as a literal character. Dark humor played for shock and laughs. All of the elements that would define the show for decades were present in a student film made in a college classroom. Parker and his friend Matt Stone continued developing the concept after college. In 1995, a Fox broadcasting executive named Brian Graydon paid Parker and Stone to create a video Christmas card that he could send to his friends. Parker and Stone used the money to make a second short film, this one called The Spirit of Christmas, with the subtitle Jesus vs. Santa. This version featured more refined versions of the 4 boys, now recognizable as Early Stan, Kyle, Cartman, and Kenny, though the character designs were still rough. In the short, Jesus and Santa Claus get into a violent fistfight over the true meaning of Christmas. The boys watch in confusion as the 2 holiday icons beat each other senseless. Graydon sent the short to his friends as a Christmas card. Those friends made copies and sent them to their friends. Those people made more copies. In an era before YouTube, before social media, before viral videos were even a concept, the spirit of Christmas spread through physical VHS tapes and early file sharing on the internet. It became one of the first truly viral videos, years before that term even existed. Copies circulated through Hollywood offices, college campuses, and eventually overseas. Thousands of people saw it, then tens of thousands, then more. The viral spread of the spirit of Christmas caught the attention of television executives. Comedy Central, which in the mid-1990s was a relatively small cable network struggling to find its identity, saw an opportunity. They gave Parker and Stone the money and time to create a pilot episode. The pitch to Comedy Central has become part of television lore. Parker and Stone showed the Spirit of Christmas short to network executives, along with their concept for a full series. The executives responded enthusiastically. Comedy Central gave them the green light and the resources to produce a pilot episode. The network saw something in the crude animation and vulgar humor that they believed could become a hit. Comedy Central at the time was a small cable network desperate for breakout content, and South Park was unlike anything else on television. The gamble paid off beyond anyone's expectations. Comedy Central greenlit the series. The pilot episode was called Cartman Gets an Anal Probe, and it premiered on August 13, 1997. In the episode, aliens visit South Park and abduct Cartman, performing experiments on him. The episode featured alien anal probes, foul language, and Kenny being killed and eaten by rats. It was crude, offensive, and unlike anything else on television. The premiere drew a 1.3 Nielsen rating, which translated to roughly 980,000 viewers. For a cable show on a network that most people did not watch, this was a strong debut. But what happened next was extraordinary. The ratings climbed rapidly with each new episode. By the 10th episode of Season 1, the Nielsen rating had risen to 6.4. South Park had gone from a niche curiosity to a cultural phenomenon in a matter of weeks. The impact on Comedy Central was enormous. Before South Park, Comedy Central was available in approximately 9 million households. By 1998, 1 year after South Park's debut, Comedy Central was in approximately 50 million households. South Park did not just boost the network's ratings, it transformed the network from a minor cable channel into a major force in television. Advertisers who had never considered Comedy Central suddenly wanted to be associated with the network's highest-rated program. Cable providers who had not bothered to carry the channel were now adding it to their lineups because subscribers were demanding access to South Park. The show became a merchandising juggernaut. South Park t-shirts, hats, and dolls were everywhere. Cartman's catchphrases became part of the cultural vocabulary. The "oh my god, they killed Kenny" running gag became one of the most recognized quotes in television history. But South Park was also immediately controversial from the very beginning. The show received a TVMA rating from its premiere, making it the first weekly television program in history to carry that rating. The content was more extreme than anything else on American television at the time. Children using profanity, graphic violence played for comedy, explicit sexual references, and unflinching satire of religion, politics, and social issues were all present from episode 1. Parents' groups complained. Media watchdogs expressed concern. News segments debated whether the show was appropriate for the audiences that were watching it, many of whom were teenagers who were technically too young for TVMA content. Parker and Stone did not care. They had made a show that reflected their sensibility, which was to find humor in everything and to treat no subject as sacred. This philosophy would define every episode they ever made, and it would lead directly to every controversy we have discussed in this video. The show that mocked Scientology, depicted Muhammad, enraged China, and challenged the Catholic Church was the same show from day one. The creators never changed. The world around them changed, but Parker and Stone kept doing what they had always done. The production process of South Park is itself remarkable and directly relevant to the show's ability to engage with controversy in real time. Each episode is produced in approximately 6 days. This is extraordinarily fast for an animated show. Most animated series take months to produce a single episode. The Simpsons, for example, has a production cycle of 6 to 8 months per episode. Family Guy has a similar timeline. South Park's 6-day cycle is possible because of the show's animation style. While the original shorts were made with literal construction paper cutouts, the television series quickly transitioned to computer animation that mimics the look of paper cutouts. The software allows a team to create, animate, and render episodes at a speed that would be impossible with traditional animation techniques. This rapid production cycle means that South Park can respond to current events almost in real time. When something happens in the news on a Monday, an episode about it can potentially air the following Wednesday. This has allowed the show to be extraordinarily timely. They have produced episodes about presidential elections while the results were still being counted. They have responded to major news events within days of their occurrence. They have turned around entire episodes based on developments that happened during the production week. This speed is also relevant to the censorship stories because it means that when Comedy Central decides to censor something, the decision often comes at the last possible moment. The network sees the finished episode and makes a call. There is no lengthy review process. There is no back and forth over weeks of production. The episode is made, it is delivered, and the network either airs it or alters it. The censorship of episode 201 happened in this compressed timeline. Parker and Stone submitted their final cut, and Comedy Central made changes to it before broadcast without the creators' involvement. The 6-day production cycle has been documented in a 2011 documentary called 6 Days to Air, which followed the production of the season 15 premiere, Human Centipede. The documentary showed Parker and Stone working around the clock, sleeping at the studio, rewriting scripts multiple times, and pushing the episode out the door just hours before it was scheduled to air. The documentary confirmed what fans had long suspected, that the frantic pace of production was not an occasional emergency, but the normal way the show was made. This production model has allowed South Park to remain relevant for nearly 3 decades. While other animated shows are commenting on events that happened months ago, South Park can comment on events that happened last week. This immediacy gives the show a vitality that keeps audiences engaged and gives Parker and Stone the ability to say what they want to say while the conversation is still happening. The show's influence on popular culture extends far beyond its controversy. South Park popularized numerous phrases and concepts that have entered the mainstream. The idea of Man-Bear-Pig, originally a parody of Al Gore's climate change advocacy, became a recurring symbol that the show later used to acknowledge the reality of climate change. The concept of tegrity from Randy's marijuana farm became a cultural shorthand for false sincerity. The phrase, "Oh my God, they killed Kenny," is recognized by people who have never watched a single episode of the show. South Park also influenced the entire trajectory of adult animation on television. Before South Park, adult-oriented animated shows were rare. The Simpsons existed, of course, but it operated within significantly more restrained boundaries than what South Park would attempt. After South Park proved that an animated show could be successful with extreme content and a TVMA rating, other shows followed. Family Guy, which had been canceled, was revived partly because of the appetite for adult animation that South Park had helped create. Shows like Archer, Big Mouth, and Rick and Morty exist in a landscape that South Park helped build. The show's commitment to equal opportunity offense has been both its greatest strength and the source of virtually all its controversy. Parker and Stone's position has always been consistent. Either everything is fair game or nothing is. You cannot mock Christianity but protect Islam from mockery. You cannot satirize Mormonism but leave Scientology alone. You cannot make fun of American politicians but treat Chinese leaders as untouchable. The moment you create exceptions, you give power to whoever is most willing to demand an exception. And as the Muhammad episodes proved, the people most willing to demand exceptions are often the people most willing to back those demands with threats. This philosophy has made South Park both loved and hated by people on every point of the political and social spectrum. Conservatives have praised the show for mocking political correctness and liberal orthodoxy. Liberals have praised the show for attacking corporate greed, religious hypocrisy, and authoritarian governments. Both groups have also attacked the show when it turned its satirical eye on their own sacred cows. South Park is not on anyone's side. It is on the side of finding everything ridiculous, which means everyone eventually becomes a target. Before we move on, make sure to subscribe if you're enjoying this breakdown. Now let us trace the journey of these lost episodes through the streaming era, because the way they have been handled over the past decade tells its own story about how the television industry thinks about controversial content. When South Park first became available for streaming, the home was Hulu. Hulu acquired the streaming rights in 2014, and for several years, it was the primary way that people watched South Park online outside of the official South Park Studios website. During the Hulu era, the 5 Muhammad-related episodes were already excluded. Super Best Friends, Cartoon Wars Part 1, Cartoon Wars Part 2, 200, and 201 were not part of the Hulu library. This meant that even before the massive deals with HBO Max and Paramount Plus, the episodes were already missing from the streaming landscape. When HBO Max launched in 2020, the platform made a huge splash by acquiring South Park's streaming rights in a deal that was reported to be worth over $500 million. This was an enormous investment in a single animated property, and it signaled how valuable South Park was considered in the streaming wars. But even a $500 million deal did not include those 5 episodes. Deadline reported on June 25, 2020, that the 5 episodes featuring Muhammad were absent from the HBO Max library. The Hollywood Reporter confirmed the same day that the exclusion was a deliberate decision, not an oversight. The Hollywood Reporter added an important detail. South Park Studios was on board with the decision. The exclusion had been discussed and agreed upon before Viacom licensed the series to HBO Max. This was not a case of HBO Max unilaterally deciding to omit the episodes. The production company itself had accepted that these episodes would not be part of any streaming package. Whatever Parker and Stone's personal feelings about the censorship might be, their company had agreed to keep the episodes out of the deal. This means the decision to keep the 5 episodes off streaming is not just a network decision. It is an industry-wide consensus that these episodes are too risky to make widely available. Every company that has been involved in the streaming of South Park, including Hulu, HBO Max, and Paramount Plus, has reached the same conclusion. The 5 episodes stay offline. When the show moved to Paramount Plus as its exclusive streaming home, which is the current arrangement as of 2026, the same 5 episodes remained absent. New episodes air on Comedy Central first and then become available on Paramount Plus the next day. The back catalog of nearly 340 episodes is available on the platform. but 5 episodes are missing, and there is no indication that they will ever be restored. The official South Park Studios website, which is the free streaming portal operated by the show's production company, also excludes the 5 episodes. This website has historically been one of the most accessible ways to watch South Park, and for many years it was the only legal way to watch full episodes for free. The fact that even the creator's own website does not host these episodes tells you how comprehensive the ban is. For fans who want to watch the missing 5, the options are limited. The DVD and Blu-ray releases that were manufactured before the ban contain the episodes. South Park. The complete 5th season, released on DVD in February 2005 and on Blu-ray in December 2017, includes Super Best Friends. South Park. The complete 10th season includes both Cartoon Wars episodes. South Park. The complete 14th season, released in April 2011, includes both 200 and 201, though 201 is in its censored form with the audio bleeps intact. These physical media releases are the only legal way to access the content. Used copies of these DVD and Blu-ray sets are available for purchase online, and they generally sell for reasonable prices since they were mass-produced before the ban went into effect. If you are willing to buy physical media, you can still watch every banned episode of South Park in the comfort of your home. You just cannot stream them. The situation is different internationally. Some countries have different arrangements for which episodes are available, and international DVD releases may have different contents than the American versions. The Region 4 DVD release of Season 14, for example, reportedly has omissions related to Episode 201. Canadian and European releases have their own variations, but broadly speaking, the 5 episodes are absent from streaming everywhere that matters. Now let us talk about South Park's theatrical film because it has its own fascinating censorship story that predates all of the television controversies we have discussed. South Park, Bigger, Longer, and Uncut was released in theaters on June 30th, 1999. It was a full-length animated musical film that took the characters and humor of the television show and amplified everything to a theatrical scale. The film was a massive success, earning over $83 million worldwide at the box office on a budget of just $21 million. The film's plot centers on the boys seeing a Terrence and Phillip movie that is so vulgar it corrupts their language. Their parents, horrified by the boys' new vocabulary, blame Canada for the corruption and eventually start a war against Canada. Meanwhile, Kenny dies and goes to hell, where he discovers that Satan is planning to invade Earth. Satan is in a toxic relationship with Saddam Hussein, who is depicted as a manipulative, abusive partner. The climax involves a full-scale war, Satan's invasion, and Kenny sacrificing himself to save the world. The film contained extreme profanity, graphic animated violence, sexual content, and satire of religion, censorship, and American culture. It was everything that made the television show controversial, but bigger and louder. The Motion Picture Association of America initially gave the film an NC-17 rating. This is the most restrictive rating available and would have effectively killed the film's commercial prospects, since most theaters will not screen NC-17 films and most newspapers will not accept advertising for them. Parker and Stone had to go back and make changes to get the rating down to an R. The process of negotiating with the MPAA became its own kind of absurdist theater. Parker and Stone have described making changes that they thought were minor, resubmitting the film, and being told it still deserved an NC-17. They would make more changes, resubmit, and get the same response. At one point, they were told the film was too vulgar, but were not given specific guidance about what exactly needed to change. The MPAA's feedback was vague and subjective, which made the process frustrating and seemingly arbitrary. The title of the film is itself a joke about the ratings process. Bigger, Longer, and Uncut is a sexual innuendo that somehow made it past the MPAA as an acceptable title for a film they were trying to restrict. Parker and Stone considered this a minor victory. The film eventually received its R rating after multiple rounds of edits. The final version was still extraordinarily vulgar by any standard. It contained the song Uncle Faka, which the characters sing in full during the film. It contained graphic depictions of hell. It contained Saddam Hussein in sexually explicit scenes with Satan. The fact that this version was the cleaned-up version that the MPAA approved tells you how extreme the original cut must have been. The film was nominated for the Academy Award for Best Original Song for the song Blame Canada. Trey Parker and Matt Stone attended the Oscar ceremony wearing dresses, apparently after taking acid. They did not win. Phil Collins won for his song from Tarzan. Parker and Stone have described this as one of the most disappointing moments of their careers, not because they expected to win, but because they really did not like Phil Collins. The home media releases of the film have their own history. The DVD was released on November 23, 1999. A Blu-ray followed on June 30th, 2009. The versions available on physical media are the theatrical R-rated cut. The original NC-17 version has never been officially released, though given Parker and Stone's history, it is likely that the differences between the NC-17 and R versions are relatively minor. The film is currently available on Paramount Plus and can be rented or purchased through standard digital storefronts. Moving forward in time, we need to discuss the Paramount Plus exclusive specials, which represent a unique chapter in South Park's history, and one that intersects with the censorship story in an unexpected way. Starting in 2021, Parker and Stone began producing long-form South Park specials exclusively for Paramount Plus. These specials were part of their massive deal with Paramount Global and represented a new format for the show. Instead of the standard 22-minute episodes, the specials ran approximately 45 minutes each, giving Parker and Stone more room to develop longer stories. The first of these was the Pandemic Special, which aired in 2020 as part of Season 24, and directly addressed the COVID-19 pandemic. The special dealt with the pandemic, lockdowns, remote schooling, and the societal chaos that accompanied the crisis. It was nominated for the Primetime Emmy Award for Outstanding Animated Program. The Pandemic Special was notable for its willingness to tackle a subject that many shows were avoiding. While other programs were carefully sidestepping references to COVID out of fear of being insensitive, South Park dove straight into it with its trademark lack of restraint. The post-COVID and return of COVID specials, released on Paramount Plus in 2021, took the pandemic theme even further. These specials imagined a future timeline where the characters were adults dealing with the long-term aftermath of COVID. They explored themes of loss, regret, and the ways in which a crisis can permanently alter the trajectory of a community. These Paramount Plus specials continued the show's tradition of engaging directly with whatever the world was experiencing, but they also represented a shift in how South Park was distributed. For the first time, significant South Park content was being released directly on a streaming platform rather than airing on Comedy Central first. This shift to streaming-first distribution means that the future of South Park is increasingly tied to the decisions of streaming platform executives, which is relevant to the censorship question. If future episodes contain content that Paramount Plus finds uncomfortable, the platform could theoretically refuse to release them, just as Comedy Central refused to air the uncensored version of 201. However, the $1.5 billion deal that Parker and Stone signed gives them extraordinary leverage. When you're responsible for bringing that much value to a platform, you have more creative freedom than almost anyone else in television. Parker and Stone's financial importance to Paramount Global is a form of protection against censorship that few creators enjoy. It is much harder to censor someone when your company has committed $1.5 billion to their output. That said, the Muhammad episodes remain off-limits. Even the most valuable creators in television cannot force their distributor to host content that the distributor considers a security risk. The financial calculation is straightforward. The 5 missing episodes generate no meaningful revenue on their own. The risk of hosting them, even if that risk is small, outweighs the benefit. And so they stay offline even as the rest of the show's 300-plus episode catalog streams without restriction. The evolution of South Park's distribution model also means that the show's relationship with censorship has changed over time. In the early years, the only way to see South Park was on Comedy Central. If the network censored something, that was it. Viewers had no alternative. Today, with streaming, DVDs, Blu-rays, international broadcasts, and the internet, content that is censored in one place may still be available in another. The Canadian broadcasts of many South Park episodes were less censored than the American versions. International DVD releases sometimes contain content that was removed from American releases. The internet has made it virtually impossible to completely suppress any piece of media. This is why the 5 missing episodes exist in a strange twilight. They are not available on any major streaming platform. They have not aired on American television in years. But they are not truly gone. Physical copies exist in millions of homes. Clips and full episodes can be found online through unofficial channels. Anyone who genuinely wants to watch Super Best Friends or 200 or 201 can find a way to do so. The ban is effective in the sense that the episodes are not part of the official, easily accessible catalog. But it is ineffective in the sense that the content has not been erased, it has just been made harder to find. Before we move on, make sure to subscribe if you're enjoying this breakdown. Now let us go deeper into the early history of South Park because there are fascinating details about the show's creation that most fans have never heard. And some of these details connect to the lost episode story in unexpected ways. When Comedy Central ordered the pilot in 1997, the show was still in a very raw state. The animation was crude even by the standards of the time. Character designs were rough. Voice acting was still being developed. Parker and Stone were figuring out the show in real time, and the pilot episode, Cartman Gets an Anal Probe, reflected that process. It was funny and shocking, but it was also clearly the work of 2 young creators who were still learning how to make a television show. The pilot was produced in association with Celluloid Studios, and the show's production would eventually be handled by South Park Studios in Culver City, California, along with Comedy Partners and Paramount Television. The production company South Park Digital Studios operates as a joint partnership between MTV Entertainment Group and Park County, which is Parker and Stone's own production company. The first season was a phenomenon. Ratings climbed from that initial 1.3 Nielsen rating to extraordinary heights. The most watched episode of the entire series remains Cartman's Mom is a Dirty Slut, the season 1 finale, and its resolution in Cartman's Mom is Still a Dirty Slut, the second episode of season 2. Those episodes drew approximately 6.2 to 6.4 million viewers and achieved an 8.2 Nielsen rating, which at the time was a record for non-sports programming on basic cable. The South Park merchandise machine was running at full speed. T-shirts with Cartman saying, "Respect my authority," were everywhere. Kenny's hooded face appeared on backpacks, lunchboxes, and posters. The show crossed over from being a television program into being a cultural phenomenon in a way that very few animated shows have ever achieved. But behind the scenes, things were not as smooth as the ratings suggested. Parker and Stone have admitted, in DVD commentary recorded for the Season 3 release, that they were extremely dissatisfied with the majority of Season 2. The pressure of producing the show on a rapid schedule while simultaneously dealing with the overwhelming attention and expectations was taking a toll. They felt that many of the Season 2 episodes were not up to the standard they wanted. The creative strain of trying to maintain quality while the world was watching was immense. This dissatisfaction is reflected in the ratings data. While the show's popularity remained strong, the per-episode ratings began to plateau and eventually decline from their Season 1 peaks. This is normal for any television show. The initial burst of curiosity fades and the audience settles into a stable core. But for Parker and Stone, who are perfectionists in their own chaotic way, the decline was frustrating. The show found its footing again in later seasons. Season 5, which aired in 2001, is often cited as one of the strongest in the show's history. That season included Scott Tenorman Must Die, which is rated 9.6 out of 10 on IMDb and is widely considered the darkest and most defining Cartman moment in the entire series. It also included It Hits the Fan, with its record-setting profanity, and Super Best Friends, which we have already discussed at length. Seasons 8 through 11 are generally considered the show's creative peak by both fans and critics. This era produced Make Love Not Warcraft, the Emmy-winning episode that was filmed using machinima techniques within the World of Warcraft game engine. It produced Good Times with Weapons, which featured extensive segments animated in a stylized Japanese anime format. It produced the Imagination Land trilogy, which was an epic fantasy storyline spanning 3 episodes. And it produced Trapped in the Closet, the Scientology episode that we covered earlier. The show's IMDb ratings data supports this assessment. Season 8 has the highest average rating of any South Park season at approximately 8.6 out of 10. The overall series rating on IMDb is 8.7 based on over 441,000 individual ratings. The show has maintained remarkably consistent quality over its run, though individual episodes vary significantly. The lowest-rated episodes on IMDb include Going Native from Season 16, Royal Pudding from Season 15, and A Million Little Fibers from Season 10, all of which fall in the 6.1 to 6.4 range. Even the worst South Park episodes are still rated above average by IMDb standards. The show's critical reception has also been strong. Metacritic lists the show with a Metascore of 64 based on 19 professional critic reviews, with a much higher user score of 8.3 based on over 2,600 ratings. The gap between the professional critic score and the user score suggests that South Park is more appreciated by its audience than by traditional television critics, which is not surprising given the show's deliberately provocative content. Now, let us connect the early history back to the censorship story, because there is an important through line that runs from the very beginning of South Park to the present day. When Parker and Stone created the show, they established a fundamental principle. Nothing is off limits. Everything can be mocked. Every person, every institution, every belief system is fair game for satire. This was not just a creative philosophy, it was the basis on which the show operated. Comedy Central knew what they were getting when they ordered the pilot. Viewers knew what they were getting when they tuned in. South Park's appeal was inseparable from its willingness to go places that other shows would not. This principle worked beautifully when the targets of the satire were unable or unwilling to retaliate effectively. Making fun of celebrities generated publicity but no real consequences. Mocking politicians attracted attention but posed no threat to anyone's safety. Satirizing Christianity, Judaism, Buddhism, and Mormonism produced occasional complaints, but no serious attempts at censorship. The show operated in an environment where the social contract held. You can make fun of things, and the people you make fun of will either ignore you or push back through legitimate channels. The Muhammad controversy broke that social contract. For the first time, the target of South Park's satire responded not with complaints or lawsuits or boycotts, but with the explicit threat of lethal violence. This was fundamentally different from anything the show had experienced before. The Catholic League complained loudly about Bloody Mary, but nobody was in danger. Scientology explored legal options after Trapped in the Closet, but nobody's life was threatened. Revolution Muslims' post about Parker and Stone ending up like Theo Van Gogh was a threat of murder. The Anwar al-Awlaki audio clips included on the post were calls for assassination. This escalation from cultural pushback to violent threats is what separates the Muhammad episodes from every other South Park controversy. And it is what makes the censorship of those 5 episodes different in kind, not just in degree, from every other attempt to suppress the show. Parker and Stone have handled each controversy differently. After the Catholic League campaign against Bloody Mary, they did not change their approach to religious satire. They continued mocking Christianity in countless subsequent episodes without hesitation. After the Scientology controversy, they devoted an entire episode to killing off Chef and mocking the organization that took him away. They did not flinch. But after the Muhammad controversy, something changed. Parker and Stone have not made another episode centered on Muhammad since 2010. They have not attempted to show his image again. They have not directly revisited the question of whether Muhammad can appear on the show. Whether this represents a tactical retreat, a personal decision to move on to other subjects, or a genuine acknowledgement that the risk is not worth taking is impossible to know from the outside. But the absence is notable. The creators who have never backed down from anything backed away from this one subject. This does not mean they have become timid. The show's content since 2010 has been as provocative as ever. Season 19 introduced PSC principle and launched an extended satire of political correctness culture. Season 20 featured a heavily serialized storyline about internet trolling and the 2016 presidential election, with Mr. Garrison serving as a Donald Trump analog. Season 23 included Banned in China, which we discussed earlier, and which triggered an international incident with a nuclear power. Seasons 27 and 28 featured extended satirical storylines about the Trump administration's second term, including a depiction of an abusive romantic relationship between Trump and Satan. The show has not lost its edge, but Muhammad remains untouched. The one subject that resulted in genuine, credible threats of violence has been left alone. And the 5 episodes that dealt with that subject remain offline. The show's approach to serialization has also evolved in ways that affect how controversial episodes fit into the larger narrative. In the early years, South Park was almost entirely episodic. Each episode was a self-contained story. You could watch them in any order without missing anything. This format meant that pulling a single episode from the lineup did not create any narrative problems. Super Best Friends could be removed from Season 5 without affecting any other episode. But starting with Season 18 in 2014, the show began experimenting with serialized storytelling. Plot threads carried over from episode to episode. Characters' actions had consequences that persisted across the season. Season 20 was the most heavily serialized, with a single continuous 10-episode arc about an internet troll called Skank Hunt 42 and the 2016 election. The reception to Season 20's heavy serialization was mixed, and subsequent seasons dialed back the approach, returning to a hybrid model where individual episodes told self-contained stories, but loose character arcs continued across the season. This serialization trend means that if a future South Park episode containing controversial content were pulled from streaming, it could potentially disrupt the narrative of an entire season. The Muhammad episodes were from the episodic era, so their removal was relatively clean. But in a serialized season, removing an episode could leave viewers confused about plot developments that were set up in one episode and paid off in a later one. This has not happened yet, but it is a consideration that the show's producers presumably think about when deciding how far to push the boundaries. The show's financial position has never been stronger than it is today. The $1.5 billion deal signed in July 2025 with Paramount Global guarantees 50 new episodes at approximately 10 per year, securing the show through at least 2029 or 2030. This financial commitment gives Parker and Stone an extraordinary degree of creative freedom. They are, in a very real sense, too valuable to censor on most subjects. The show's viewership has also rebounded in recent years. Season 27, which aired in the summer of 2025, saw strong numbers. The premiere episode, Sermon on the Mount, drew 5.9 million cross-platform viewers in its first 3 days, a 68% increase over the season 26 premiere, and the biggest Comedy Central premiere share since 1999. The second episode, Gotta Nut, drew approximately 6.2 million cross-platform viewers, making it the most watched South Park episode since 2018. These numbers demonstrate that the show is not just surviving, but thriving nearly 3 decades into its run. The linear television ratings tell a slightly different story. When you look at just the traditional cable viewership, the numbers are more modest. Season 28, which aired in late 2025, averaged approximately 438,000 viewers per episode on linear broadcasts. The Season 28 premiere in October drew 461,000 live viewers. These are smaller numbers, but they reflect the broader decline of linear television rather than any loss of interest in South Park specifically. The cross-platform numbers, which include streaming views on Paramount+, tell the real story of the show's continuing popularity. South Park has also maintained a presence in the cultural conversation through its video games, its theatrical film, and its countless contributions to internet culture. Memes from the show, quotes from characters, and references to specific episodes remain a staple of online discourse. The show has been referenced, parodied, and discussed by politicians, journalists, academics, and fellow creators. It is not just a television show, it is a cultural institution. And yet 5 episodes remain missing from its official lineup. In a catalog of 338 episodes, 5 are absent. It is a small number in percentage terms. But those 5 episodes represent some of the most important creative and political statements that Parker and Stone have ever made. The Cartoon Wars episodes are a brilliant meta-commentary on censorship. The 200 and 201 episodes are an ambitious celebration of the show's history combined with a searing critique of how threats of violence control public discourse. Super Best Friends is a charming, silly episode that happened to feature a religious figure who later became untouchable. The absence of these episodes from the streaming catalog is a reminder that even the most defiant, most irreverent, most boundary-pushing show in television history has limits. Not limits imposed by the creators, but limits imposed by reality. The reality of violent threats, the reality of corporate risk assessment, the reality that some subjects carry consequences that no television show, no matter how beloved or how profitable, is willing to accept. Before we move on to our final thoughts, make sure to subscribe if you're enjoying this breakdown. Now let us step back and look at the full picture, because when you lay out every controversy side by side, a pattern emerges that tells you something profound about how censorship works in the modern world. Let us go through them in chronological order. In 2001, Super Best Friends aired with Muhammad, depicted openly as a superhero. No controversy, no complaints, no consequences. Muhammad appeared in background shots for years afterward. Nobody noticed, nobody cared. In 2005, the Jyllands-Posten cartoon controversy in Denmark changed the rules of engagement. Suddenly, depicting Muhammad in any Western media was understood to carry the risk of violent retaliation. The world had seen embassies burned, people killed, and entire countries convulsed with rage over cartoons. The risk was no longer theoretical. Also in 2005, Trapped in the Closet aired and targeted Scientology. The church explored legal action, found they had no case, and instead attempted to pressure Comedy Central through the threat of financial consequences, specifically by potentially interfering with Tom Cruise's promotion of Mission Impossible 3. The result was one canceled rerun. The episode returned to regular rotation and has never been suppressed again. Also in 2005, Bloody Mary aired and targeted the Catholic Church. The Catholic League organized a campaign demanding permanent removal. They succeeded in canceling one rerun. The episode returned to regular rotation and has never been suppressed. In 2006, Cartoon Wars aired and directly addressed the Muhammad censorship issue. Comedy Central refused to show Muhammad's image and inserted a black censorship bar. Parker and Stone's protest, showing Jesus in a degrading scene immediately after the censored Muhammad scene, was allowed to air uncensored. The double standard was on full display. The episodes are now among the 5 permanently missing from streaming. Also in 2006, Isaac Hayes departed the show under circumstances that would not be fully understood for nearly 20 years. The departure was orchestrated by Scientologists around Hayes, not by Hayes himself, according to his son, and corroborated by Matt Stone. Parker and Stone responded with the return of Chef, which killed the character. The show continued without interruption. In 2010, episodes 200 and 201 aired and triggered death threats from Revolution Muslim. The NYPD increased security at Comedy Central. Comedy Central censored 201 beyond what Parker and Stone had approved, bleeping out the entire moral of the episode. Zachary Chesser, the author of the threat post, was sentenced to 25 years in federal prison. The episodes were pulled from all streaming platforms and have never returned. Super Best Friends was retroactively pulled as collateral damage. The uncensored version of 201 has never been officially released. Also in 2010, the Everybody Draw Muhammad Day movement, inspired by the South Park controversy, resulted in its creator Molly Norris being forced into hiding by the FBI after receiving death threats from Al-Qaeda. Norris changed her identity and effectively ceased to exist as a public person. India banned the entire South Park series the same year, citing extreme vulgarity. The ban lasted until 2019. In 2019, Banned in China aired and triggered the Chinese government to ban the entire South Park franchise from the Chinese internet. Every episode, clip, and discussion was scrubbed from Chinese platforms. Parker and Stone responded with a sarcastic mock apology that went viral. The ban remains in effect in 2026. The episode itself was never removed from Western platforms. In 2025, Gotta Nut was temporarily pulled from Comedy Central's cable schedule following the death of a real-world figure who was parodied in the episode. The episode remained on Paramount Plus throughout. When you look at this timeline, the hierarchy of censorship becomes obvious. Institutional pressure, whether from the Catholic League or the Church of Scientology, produced temporary inconveniences at most. One canceled rerun here, one replacement episode there. Nothing permanent, nothing that changed the show's trajectory. Government censorship, as in the case of China, was comprehensive within that government's borders but had no effect outside of them. China erased South Park from its internet, but the episode that caused the ban plays freely on Paramount Plus to this day. The Chinese government's reach extends only as far as its own borders. But the threat of lethal violence produced permanent results. 5 episodes removed from every streaming platform worldwide. An uncensored version of an episode locked in an archive, never to be released. A cartoonist in hiding under a new identity. increased security at a comedy network's headquarters, a federal prison sentence for the man who made the threats. This hierarchy is exactly what Kyle was trying to articulate in his censored speech at the end of 201. The only true power is the willingness to commit violence, not institutional power, not financial power, not cultural power, violence. The people who filed complaints and organized campaigns got temporary results at best. The people who threatened to kill got permanent results. The system, as Parker and Stone observe through their characters, rewards the most extreme response. This is not a lesson that Parker and Stone invented. It is a lesson they observed from their own experience and translated into the dialogue of their show. And then the very speech that articulated this lesson was censored because of the very dynamic it described. The irony is so complete that it almost feels scripted, but it was not, it was real. The broader impact of the South Park censorship saga extends well beyond the show itself. The 200 and 201 controversy became a touchstone in the global debate about free speech and the limits of satire. Academics have written about it, journalists have cited it, free speech organizations have used it as a case study. The question of whether Western media should self-censor to avoid provoking violent reactions remains one of the most difficult and contentious issues in contemporary culture. The Charlie Hebdo attack in Paris on January 7, 2015, when 12 people were killed at the offices of a French satirical magazine that had published cartoons of Muhammad, gave the question a horrifying new dimension. The massacre demonstrated that the threats were not empty. People had been willing to kill over cartoons. The risk that Comedy Central had been trying to mitigate by censoring South Park turned out to be real. Whether Comedy Central's decision to pull the episodes was cowardly or prudent depends entirely on your perspective, but the Charlie Hebdo attack removed any doubt that the risk was genuine. Parker and Stone have never publicly commented on whether the Charlie Hebdo attack changed their thinking about the Muhammad episodes. They have not said whether they would make 200 and 201 again if they could go back. They have not said whether they believe the episodes should be restored to streaming. Their silence on the subject is itself telling. These are two men who have an opinion about everything and share those opinions freely through their show. The fact that they have said so little about the Muhammad situation suggests that it occupies a different category in their thinking than any other controversy they have been involved in. The lost episodes also raise questions about the preservation of art and the rights of creators versus the decisions of distributors. Parker and Stone created these episodes. They wrote them, directed them, voiced characters in them, and submitted them to their network for broadcast. The episodes were completed creative works that were broadcast to millions of viewers, but the decision about whether those works remain available was not made by the creators. It was made by network executives, streaming platform operators, and corporate lawyers who weighed the risk of hosting the content against the benefit of making it available. In most cases, creators do not have the final say over whether their work is distributed. The network or platform that finances and distributes the content makes those decisions. Parker and Stone, despite their enormous influence and their billion-dollar deal, cannot unilaterally restore the 5 missing episodes to Paramount+. The platform has to agree, and the platform has decided that the risk is not worth taking. This dynamic is not unique to South Park. Television episodes have been pulled from streaming for various reasons across the industry. Episodes of The Simpsons, 30 Rock, Scrubs, The Office, and other shows have been removed because they contained blackface or other content that was later deemed inappropriate. But the South Park situation is different because the episodes were not pulled for containing content that the creators or the audience later found offensive. They were pulled because of external threats. The content itself is not the problem. The response to the content is the problem. This distinction matters for anyone who cares about the future of creative expression. If the standard for removing content from streaming platforms is that someone, somewhere, might respond with violence, then any sufficiently determined group can suppress any content they dislike. All they need to do is make a credible enough threat. The precedent set by the Muhammad episode suggests that this strategy works, and if it works, it will be used again, by different groups, for different reasons, against different targets. Parker and Stone understood this in 2010 when they wrote Kyle's speech. They understood that the censorship of their show was not an isolated incident, but a signal that told the world that threats work. That signal has been received. Whether it has been acted on by others is a question that extends far beyond the scope of this video, but the signal was sent and it has never been retracted. The 5 lost episodes of South Park sit at the intersection of art, commerce, religion, politics, and violence. They are a test case for the question of how a free society handles creative expression that some people consider unacceptable. The answer, as demonstrated by the past 25 years of South Park history, is that a free society handles it inconsistently. Some complaints are ignored, some lead to temporary concessions, some result in permanent suppression. The determining factor is not the severity of the offense, it is the severity of the response. An episode mocking the Virgin Mary caused a brief scheduling change. An episode mocking Scientology caused a voice actor to lose his job through no fault of his own. An episode mocking Muhammad caused death threats, police protection, prison sentences, and the permanent removal of 5 episodes from the television record. An episode mocking China caused an entire country to pretend the show does not exist. Each of these outcomes tells you something different about the organization or government that was offended, and about the system that processed their response. The Catholic League had institutional power but no teeth. Scientology had financial leverage but limited reach. Revolution. Muslim had almost no institutional power at all, just a website and a willingness to reference murder. But their approach was the only one that produced lasting results. That is the story of South Park's lost episodes. And it is a story that is still being written, because as long as the 5 episodes remain offline, and as long as the uncensored version of 201 remains locked in an archive, the dynamic that Kyle described continues to operate. The threat worked, the censorship holds, and the only way to watch these episodes is to find a DVD box set and a player that still reads discs. Before we wrap up, make sure to subscribe if you're enjoying this breakdown. Now, as we approach the end of this breakdown, let us take one final look at the episodes and moments that define what South Park has been across its nearly 3-decade run, and what the lost episodes mean in the context of that larger story. South Park premiered in 1997 in a world that was very different from the one we live in today. The internet existed, but was not the dominant force in media. Social media did not exist. Streaming services were decades away. The concept of canceling a show because of a social media campaign was not even imaginable, because social media campaigns were not a thing. Television was still dominated by the 3 major broadcast networks and a handful of cable channels. Comedy Central was a minor player trying to find an identity. Into this world came a show about 4 foul-mouthed 8-year-olds in a small Colorado town, created by 2 guys from Colorado who had made a construction paper animated Christmas card. The show was crude in every sense. The animation was deliberately ugly. The humor was deliberately offensive. The characters said things that no characters on television had ever said before, and audiences loved it. The early episodes of South Park established a formula that would carry the show for decades. Each episode typically begins with a relatively normal situation. A substitute teacher arrives at school, a new fast food restaurant opens in town, the boys find a strange object in the woods and then escalates that situation into absurd, satirical extremes. The boys, particularly Stan and Kyle, often serve as the voices of reason, observing the insanity of the adults around them and trying to make sense of a world that refuses to make sense. Stan Marsh is the everyman. He is the character most viewers identify with, the normal kid who reacts to the craziness around him with frustration and bewilderment. Kyle Broflovsky is the moralist. He is the character who most often delivers the episode's message, the "I learned something today" speech that became a running joke in itself. Eric Cartman is the ID. He is selfish, manipulative, cruel, and brilliant in the worst possible ways. His schemes drive many of the show's most memorable episodes. And Kenny McCormick is the wild card. He dies, often horribly in most early episodes, only to return the following week with no explanation. His recurring deaths and the other characters' casual reaction to them became one of the most distinctive running gags in television history. These 4 characters have remained the core of the show for its entire run, though the supporting cast has expanded enormously. Butterscotch Chwasin, who began as a minor background character, became one of the show's most important figures. Randy Marsh, Stan's father, evolved from a bit player into arguably the show's main character in later seasons. Mr. Garrison underwent a series of transformations that are too numerous and too strange to summarize briefly, culminating in his portrayal as a Donald Trump analog during the 2016 election season and beyond. The town of South Park itself became a character. The geography of the town, its businesses, its institutions, and its residents formed a consistent and recognizable world that viewers could inhabit week after week. The iconic locations are burned into fans' memories: City Walk, Stark's Pond, Tom's Rhinoplasty, the South Park Community Center, South Park Elementary. Each location has been the setting for dozens of stories, and the cumulative effect is a fictional world that feels lived in and real despite its deliberately crude visual style. The show's relationship with its audience has always been unusual. South Park never talks down to its viewers. Parker and Stone assume that their audience is smart enough to understand sophisticated satire, cultural references, and moral arguments, even though those arguments are delivered by animated children who use graphic profanity. This respect for the audience is part of why the show has maintained its fan base for so long. Viewers feel like they are being spoken to as equals, not being lectured at or pandered to. This brings us to one of the most important episodes in the show's history that we have not discussed yet, which provides a perfect bridge to our concluding thoughts about the lost episodes. Scott Tenorman Must Die aired as the fourth episode of Season 5 on July 11, 2001, just 1 week after Super Best Friends. It holds a 9.6 out of 10 rating on IMDb, making it the single highest-rated episode in the show's entire catalog. It is widely considered the defining episode of South Park, and the moment when Cartman went from being a comedically obnoxious fat kid to something genuinely terrifying. The episode tells a simple story. An older boy named Scott Tenorman sells Cartman his pubic hair by claiming it will make Cartman mature. Cartman pays $16 for the hair and then realizes he has been scammed. He tries repeatedly to get his money back, but Scott outsmarts him at every turn. Scott humiliates Cartman publicly, and Cartman vows revenge. Cartman hatches an elaborate scheme. He manipulates events so that Scott's parents are killed by a local farmer who mistakes them for trespassing ponies. It makes sense in context, sort of. Cartman then grinds the bodies into chili and serves the chili to Scott at a local chili cook-off. Scott eats his own parents. When Cartman reveals what he has done, Scott breaks down sobbing. Cartman licks the tears off Scott's face and declares them delicious. This episode was a turning point for the show. Before Scott Tenorman Must Die, Cartman was annoying, selfish, and occasionally mean. After it, Cartman was a genuine sociopath, capable of engineering the murder of 2 people and the emotional destruction of their son over $16. The episode established that there were no limits to what Cartman would do if he felt wronged. It elevated the show from a comedy with dark elements to a dark comedy with genuine menace lurking beneath the humor. The relevance of this episode to the Lost Episodes story is that it demonstrates what South Park is at its core. It is a show that does not flinch. It does not pull its punches. It does not decide that something is too dark or too extreme or too controversial to depict. Scott Tenorman Must Die aired without any censorship, without any controversy, and without any consequences. An episode in which a child feeds a teenager his own parents was deemed acceptable by everyone involved. But an episode featuring Muhammad standing around doing nothing was too dangerous to keep on streaming. The disparity is staggering when you think about it. You can show a child committing an act of calculated, premeditated psychological torture involving murder and cannibalism, and that is fine. But you cannot show a historical religious figure standing in the background of a scene, and that requires the episode to be pulled from every platform in the world. This is the fundamental absurdity that Parker and Stone have been pointing at for decades. The limits of acceptable content on South Park are not determined by the content itself. They are determined by the response to the content, and the response to the Muhammad episodes was violence, which is the one response that the system cannot absorb without conceding. The show has now been on the air for 28 seasons. It has produced 338 episodes, 7 Paramount Plus specials, 1 theatrical film, multiple video games, and an immeasurable amount of cultural impact. It has been banned in China, banned in India, censored by its own network, and targeted by extremists. 5 of its episodes are missing from every streaming platform on Earth. The uncensored version of one episode may never see the light of day, and through all of it, the show has kept going. Parker and Stone signed a deal worth $1.5 billion to keep making it. New seasons continue to draw millions of viewers. The show adapts to new targets, new controversies, and new cultural moments with the same speed and fearlessness that defined it in 1997. Season 27 of the show, which aired in the summer of 2025, featured a highly serialized narrative centering on a caricature of Donald Trump during his second administration, depicted as being in an abusive romantic relationship with Satan. Season 28, which aired in late 2025, featured the boys becoming obsessed with an internet meme while a billionaire character investigated the meme as a potential antichrist cult. Trump and J.D. Vance conspired to secretly abort Satan's baby. PC Principal physically fought Jesus Christ over the direction of modern Christianity. Cartman went through a religious conversion arc. The show remains as unhinged and as willing to offend as it has ever been. The creative ambition of the show has also remained high. The format-breaking episodes continue to push boundaries. Make Love Not Warcraft used machinima techniques to film entire sequences within the World of Warcraft game engine. Major Boob Age in Season 12 used heavy rotoscoping to emulate the visual style of the 1981 animated film Heavy Metal. Good Times with Weapons featured extensive segments animated in a Japanese anime style. Woodland Critter Christmas told a fairy tale about satanic woodland animals. These episodes demonstrate that Parker and Stone have never been content to simply repeat what works. They are constantly experimenting with the form and format of animated storytelling. The show's influence on comedy, on animation, on political discourse, and on the concept of free speech in media will be debated long after the show eventually ends. South Park has been praised by libertarians and progressives, conservatives and liberals, free speech absolutists, and community standards advocates. It has been condemned by all of those same groups at various points. It exists in a space that defies easy categorization, which is precisely why it has lasted so long. Parker and Stone are now in their mid-50s. They have been making South Park since they were in their late 20s. The show has been a part of their lives for longer than it has not been. And the deal they signed in 2025 commits them to at least 5 more years of production. When that deal expires, South Park will have been on the air for over 30 years. It will have outlasted most of its competitors, most of its critics, and most of the cultural phenomena it has parodied along the way. The lost episodes are a scar on that legacy, a reminder that even the most defiant voices in entertainment operate within constraints. Not constraints of imagination and not constraints of courage, but constraints of reality. The reality that some people will kill over a cartoon. The reality that corporations will protect their employees by suppressing content. The reality that the difference between a complaint and a threat is the difference between a temporarily canceled rerun and a permanently deleted episode. And now, as we come to the end of this breakdown, let us return to where we started. 5 episodes of South Park that you cannot stream. Super Best Friends from the summer of 2001, an episode about David Blaine's cult, and a superhero team of religious figures, pulled from every platform because one of those figures was Muhammad. Cartoon Wars Part 1 and Part 2 from the spring of 2006, episodes about the censorship of Muhammad that were themselves censored and then removed entirely. And 200 and 201 from the spring of 2010, episodes celebrating the show's milestone that resulted in death threats, police protection, and the most significant act of censorship in the history of American animation. Beyond the missing 5, we have discussed Trapped in the Closet and the Scientology War, including the true story of Isaac Hayes' departure, as revealed by his own son. We have discussed Bloody Mary and the Catholic League's unsuccessful campaign. We have discussed Banned in China and the erasure of South Park from the Chinese internet. We have discussed It Hits the Fan and the show's record-setting profanity. We have discussed the India ban, the video game censorship in Australia, and the show's broader history of pushing every boundary that exists. South Park has been on the air since 1997. It has survived everything. It will probably survive everything that comes next. But those 5 episodes remain offline, and somewhere in Comedy Central's archives, the uncensored version of episode 201 sits on a hard drive or a tape. with Kyle's full speech about how the only true power in the world is violence. That speech was written by Trey Parker. It was performed by the voice actors. It was animated and rendered and finished. It was submitted to the network. And then it was silenced. Not by critics, not by ratings, not by audience disinterest, but by a threat posted on a website by a man who is now serving 25 years in federal prison. The speech exists. The words exist. They were just never allowed to be heard. And that is the story of South Park's lost episodes. Not lost because they were destroyed. Not lost because they were forgotten. Lost because the world decided that some truths are too dangerous to broadcast. Lost because the people who made threats won, and the people who made art conceded. Parker and Stone knew this would happen. They wrote it into the script. They had their characters say the words, "The only true power is violence." And then violence proved them right. The show goes on, 338 episodes and counting, new seasons every year, a billion-dollar deal securing its future. South Park will keep pushing boundaries, keep offending people, keep saying the things that nobody else will say. It is what the show does. It is what it has always done. But those 5 episodes stay in the dark, and the uncensored version of 201 stays locked away. And the hierarchy of censorship that Kyle described continues to operate, quietly and effectively, in every boardroom and every executive office where decisions are made about what art the public is allowed to see. That is how censorship works, not with a bang, but with a bleep. If you enjoyed the video, make sure to subscribe, and I'll see you in the next one. Actually, before we go, there are a few more stories worth telling, because the lost episodes are not the only pieces of South Park history that exist in the shadows. There are moments from the show's production that never made it to screen, controversies that happened behind the scenes, and decisions that shaped the show in ways that most viewers never knew about. Let us talk about the Pandemic Special and its place in South Park's history of reacting to the world in real time. When the COVID-19 pandemic shut down the world in early 2020, most television shows went dark. Production stopped, writers' rooms closed. Networks scrambled to fill their schedules with reruns and reality content. The entertainment industry effectively froze. South Park did the opposite. Parker and Stone recognized that the pandemic was the single biggest thing happening in the world, and they were not going to sit it out. They produced the Pandemic Special, an extended episode that aired on September 30th, 2020, as part of what would become a uniquely structured Season 24. The special was longer than a standard episode, running approximately 1 hour, and it dealt directly with the pandemic, lockdowns, remote learning, and the societal chaos of 2020. In the special, the boys returned to school under pandemic conditions. Randy Marsh, in a characteristic display of selfishness and denial, discovers that he may have been responsible for the pandemic itself through his activities involving a pangolin and a bat at the Tegrity Farms marijuana operation. The episode is both a satire of the American response to COVID and a surprisingly emotional story about how the pandemic affected children, families, and communities. The Pandemic Special was nominated for the Primetime Emmy Award for Outstanding Animated Program. It demonstrated that South Park's rapid production cycle, which allows episodes to be created in about 6 days, could be scaled up for longer, more ambitious projects without sacrificing timeliness. The special aired while the pandemic was still raging, while lockdowns were still in effect, and while the outcome of the crisis was completely unknown. Most entertainment about COVID would not appear for years. South Park had a feature-length response ready within months. This was followed by additional Paramount Plus exclusive specials, including Post-COVID and The Return of COVID in 2021, which imagined the South Park characters as adults in a future timeline dealing with the long-term consequences of the pandemic. These specials explored themes of regret, missed opportunities, and the ways in which a collective trauma can reshape an entire generation. They were more emotionally complex than typical South Park episodes and showed that Parker and Stone's storytelling abilities had continued to evolve even after 2 decades of working on the same show. The COVID specials are relevant to the lost episode story because they demonstrate how South Park's relationship with sensitive current events has worked when threats of violence are not involved. The pandemic was an enormously sensitive topic. Millions of people were dying, entire economies were collapsing. The political divisions surrounding COVID were the deepest in recent American history. And yet South Park dove straight into the subject with its usual irreverence. Nobody threatened to kill Parker and Stone over the pandemic special. Nobody demanded it be removed from streaming. Nobody organized a campaign to have it pulled. The episode dealt with a subject that was infinitely more sensitive to most viewers than a depiction of Muhammad, and it generated no censorship controversy whatsoever. This proves the point once more. The content of the South Park episodes is not what determines whether they get censored. What determines whether they get censored is who gets offended and what they are willing to do about it. The millions of people who lost loved ones to COVID and might have found the pandemic special tasteless did not respond with violence. They either watched it or they did not. The system worked, free expression was preserved, the episode remains available to stream. But the 5 Muhammad episodes, which offended a much smaller group of people who responded with much greater intensity, remain permanently suppressed. Let us also talk about one more controversy that reveals how South Park navigates sensitive territory in real time. This involves the Steve Irwin incident, which happened during the production of the Season 10 episode Hell on Earth 2006. Steve Irwin, the beloved Australian wildlife expert known as the Crocodile Hunter, was killed on September 4, 2006, when a stingray barb pierced his chest while he was filming a documentary in the Great Barrier Reef. His death shocked the world. Irwin was one of the most recognizable and well-liked television personalities on the planet, and his sudden death at the age of 44 was a genuine tragedy. Less than 2 months later, on October the 25th, 2006, South Park aired Hell on Earth 2006, a Halloween episode in which Satan throws a party. Among the guests at Satan's party is Steve Irwin, depicted in hell with a stingray barb still sticking out of his chest. When Satan sees Irwin, he tells him that the stingray costume is really inappropriate and asks him to leave. The joke is that it is actually Steve Irwin, not someone in a costume, but Satan does not realize this. The inclusion of Irwin generated complaints, particularly from Australian viewers. The episode aired on the same network that broadcast The Crocodile Hunter, making the joke feel particularly aggressive. Comedy Central in Australia received complaints, and the episode was controversial in that market for years. Parker and Stone defended the joke by pointing out that South Park had always made fun of celebrity deaths close to the events themselves. They noted that waiting a respectful amount of time was not something the show had ever done. The joke was not about Irwin being a bad person. The joke was about the absurdity of the situation, that even in hell, the stingray costume, which was not a costume, was considered inappropriate. The Hell on Earth 2006 controversy did not result in any permanent censorship. The episode remains available on all streaming platforms. It generated complaints, but no threats, no bans, and no lasting consequences. It is another data point in the pattern. Complaints and criticism do not produce permanent censorship. Only the threat of violence does. There is also the matter of the show's relationship with its own history. South Park is one of the few long-running shows that has actively engaged with its own past in meta-textual ways. The 200 and 201 episodes were explicitly designed as a celebration of the show's history, bringing back old characters and old storylines. The COVID specials imagined the characters' futures. Season 27 and 28 continued long-running storylines that had been building for years, but the lost episodes create a gap in that history. For viewers who are discovering South Park for the first time through Paramount Plus, the show's history has holes in it. You can watch Season 5 from beginning to end, but you will skip from Episode 2 to Episode 4 with no explanation. You can watch Season 10, but you will notice that Episodes 3 and 4 are absent. You can watch Season 14, but Episodes 5 and 6 are gone. If you do not know the behind-the-scenes story, you might think these episodes were simply never made. This is particularly problematic for the serialized elements of the show. While the missing episodes are from the show's episodic era and do not create plot holes in the strictest sense, they do create continuity gaps. The 200 and 201 episodes contain the revelation about Cartman's true father, which is referenced in later episodes. Viewers who have not seen 200 and 201 may be confused by later references to this storyline. The Cartoon Wars episodes contain important commentary about the show's creative philosophy. particularly Cartman's speech about how South Park's humor differs from Family Guy's humor, which is a meta-textual statement from Parker and Stone about their own work. The absence of these episodes from the official catalog means that a piece of the show's creative legacy is inaccessible to most viewers. The episodes represent some of the most ambitious and important storytelling that Parker and Stone have ever done. The 200 and 201 two-parter was their 200th episode celebration, a milestone that most long-running shows treat as a major event. The fact that this milestone episode, which the creators clearly poured enormous creative energy into, cannot be accessed by most of the show's audience is a loss for the show's legacy. But as we noted earlier, the episodes are not truly gone. They exist on physical media, they circulate online through unofficial channels. Anyone who makes an effort can find them. The barrier to access is higher than for other episodes, but it is not insurmountable. In an age where virtually all media is expected to be available on demand through streaming services, having to seek out a DVD copy of an episode feels archaic. But the content itself survives. This is perhaps the most important takeaway from the entire story. Censorship in the internet age is fundamentally different from censorship in previous eras. When a book was banned in the 1950s, it could be genuinely suppressed. Copies could be confiscated, printing could be halted, the content could be effectively erased from public access. But in 2026, banning a piece of media from streaming platforms does not make it disappear. It makes it harder to find. It makes it less convenient to access. It removes it from the casual browsing experience. But it does not destroy it. The 5 lost episodes of South Park exist in millions of homes on DVD shelves. They exist on hard drives. They exist in the collective memory of every viewer who watched them when they originally aired. They exist in the detailed plot descriptions on Wikipedia and fan wikis. They exist in the clips and commentary that populate YouTube and other video platforms. The content has not been erased. It has been pushed to the margins. And somewhere in a secure archive, the uncensored version of episode 201 waits. Kyle's speech, Jesus' speech, Santa's speech, the words that Parker and Stone wrote about how threatening violence is the only true power in the world. Those words exist. They were performed, they were recorded, they were animated, they were rendered. They were submitted to a network that decided the world was not allowed to hear them. Maybe one day, years from now, when the threats have faded and the people who made them have been forgotten, someone will open that archive and release the uncensored version. Maybe the speeches will finally be heard as they were written. Maybe the irony of their content, that the only true power is violence, being suppressed by the threat of violence, will be appreciated as one of the most perfectly tragic moments in the history of television. Or maybe the archive will stay locked. Maybe the bleeps will remain. Maybe the only true power really is violence. And maybe that lesson is so uncomfortable that even the people who wrote it are not sure they want us to hear it. Either way, the show goes on. 338 episodes, 5 missing, 1 uncensored version locked away, and a 30-year legacy of saying what nobody else would dare to say except for the one thing that someone dared them not to. That is 3 hours of South Park's lost episodes. Thank you for watching. Good night. If you enjoyed the video, make sure to subscribe and I'll see you in the next video. One last thing before we close this out. There is a question that hangs over this entire story and it is worth addressing directly. Could the 5 missing episodes ever come back? The answer depends on who you ask and what you mean by come back. If the question is whether Comedy Central or Paramount Plus could technically restore the episodes to their streaming libraries, the answer is yes. The episodes exist. The files are in the archives. It would be a straightforward technical process to add them back to the platform. There is no legal barrier preventing it. The episodes are owned by the production company. They have been released on physical media. The content is not illegal to distribute, but the practical answer is almost certainly no, at least not in the foreseeable future. The decision to keep the 5 episodes offline has been reaffirmed with every major streaming deal. It was affirmed when the show moved from Hulu to HBO Max. It was affirmed again when the show moved from HBO Max to Paramount Plus. Each time, the same 5 episodes were excluded. This is not an oversight that someone forgot to correct. It is a deliberate, consistent decision that has been maintained across multiple corporate transitions. The security concerns that originally prompted the removal of the episodes have not changed. The Zealand's Post and Cartoons controversy demonstrated that depictions of Muhammad can trigger violent responses. The Charlie Hebdo massacre in 2015 proved that those responses can be lethal. The threat landscape has not improved. If anything, it has become more complex. Restoring the episodes to a major streaming platform would generate international media attention, and that attention could potentially reignite the same dynamics that caused the episodes to be pulled in the first place. From a business perspective, the calculation is simple. The 5 episodes generate minimal revenue individually. They are not among the show's most commercially valuable episodes in terms of advertising or subscription acquisition. The risk of hosting them, however small, exceeds the reward of making them available. When you are running a streaming platform with billions of dollars in content, there is no incentive to take even a small risk on 5 episodes that will not meaningfully affect your subscriber numbers. From a creative perspective, the situation is more nuanced. Parker and Stone have not publicly campaigned for the restoration of the episodes. They have not made public statements demanding that Paramount Plus add them back to the library. Their silence on the matter could mean many things. It could mean they have accepted the situation and moved on. It could mean they are picking their battles and focusing on new content rather than fighting over old episodes. It could mean they agree with the security assessment and do not want to put their employees or their network's employees at risk. Or it could mean they have simply decided that the irony of the situation speaks for itself and does not need their commentary. The physical media copies will continue to exist for as long as people own DVD and Blu-ray players. The used market for the relevant season box sets remains active. New copies of some sets are still being manufactured and sold. So for anyone who truly wants to see these episodes, the option exists. It just requires stepping outside the streaming ecosystem that has become the default way most people consume media. The international situation adds another dimension. Different countries have different arrangements with different levels of censorship. Some international markets may have broadcast versions of these episodes at various points over the years. The global patchwork of broadcasting rights means that the episodes have been seen by millions of people outside the United States even after they were pulled from American platforms. And of course, the internet never forgets. Clips, full episodes, and detailed descriptions of all 5 missing episodes are available online through unofficial channels. The Lost Media Wiki has extensive documentation of the 200 and 201 controversy, including detailed descriptions of what was censored and what the uncensored version reportedly contains. Fan communities have preserved the content in various forms. Wikipedia has thorough plot summaries of every episode. The content may not be on Paramount Plus, but it is not hidden. The most likely scenario for the future is that the status quo will persist. The 5 episodes will remain off streaming platforms. Physical media copies will slowly become harder to find as DVD and Blu-ray production winds down across the industry. The episodes will transition from being merely inconvenient to access to being genuinely difficult to find in their original form. But they will not disappear entirely. Too many copies exist. Too many people care about preserving them. The internet is too vast and too persistent to allow a piece of media this significant to be truly lost. The uncensored version of 201 is the most fragile piece of this story. It has never been officially released. If it exists only on Comedy Central's internal archives, it could theoretically be lost through corporate negligence, server failures, or simple bureaucratic oversight. Companies lose archival material more often than most people realize. The uncensored 201 is, in the truest sense of the term, lost media. Not lost in the sense that it was destroyed, but lost in the sense that it is inaccessible to the public and its long-term preservation is not guaranteed. The Lost Media Wiki classifies the uncensored version of 201 as a notable case. The community that tracks lost media, which includes archivists, collectors, and enthusiasts who work to preserve and recover media that has been lost, suppressed, or forgotten, has identified it as one of the most significant pieces of censored television content from the 21st century. If the uncensored version ever surfaces, whether through an official release, a leak, or an archival discovery, it would be a major event in the world of media preservation. But for now, the bleeps remain. The speeches are silenced. and the 5 episodes sit in the dark corners of the South Park catalog, present in the show's history, but absent from its present. South Park began with 2 guys making a construction paper Christmas card. It has become one of the most important and controversial television shows ever made. It has survived death threats, government bans, corporate censorship, religious outrage, and nearly 3 decades of cultural change. It has made its creators billionaires. It has made millions of people laugh. It has made millions of people angry. And it has never, not once, apologized for any of it, except for that one sarcastic apology to China. That one they definitely meant. Thank you for listening to 3 hours of South Park's lost episodes. This has been a breakdown of every banned, censored, pulled, and suppressed episode in the show's 28-season history. From Super Best Friends to Banned in China, from Muhammad to Mecha Streisand, from a construction paper Christmas card to a $1.5 billion deal. The show goes on, the lost episodes stay lost. And somewhere in Colorado, 2 guys in their 50s are probably already working on the next thing that is going to make someone very, very angry. Good night. And if you enjoyed this, subscribe. I'll see you in the next video. Actually, one more thing, because there is a detail about the 200 and 201 saga that we touched on, but deserves its own moment in this breakdown. It concerns the Times Square car bomb attempt that happened just 10 days after episode 201 aired. On May 1, 2010, a car bomb was discovered in Times Square in New York City. The bomb failed to detonate, and the suspect, Faisal Shahzad, was arrested shortly after. The attempted bombing happened in close geographic proximity to both Comedy Central's headquarters and the general area where Revolution Muslim operated. U.S. Congressman Peter T. King publicly stated that one possible motive for the attempted bombing was the whole issue with South Park and the Islamic terrorists who were threatening retribution over it. This was a sitting member of Congress suggesting that a failed terrorist attack on American soil might have been connected to a cartoon. The theory was never confirmed. NYPD Commissioner Raymond Kelly said the theory could not be ruled out, but media reports indicated that Shahzad had been training for months before the South Park episodes even aired. Revolution Muslim denied any involvement. The timing appears to have been coincidental, but the fact that the connection was seriously discussed by law enforcement and members of Congress tells you how seriously the threats against South Park were taken. A comedy show about animated children in Colorado was being discussed in the same breath as a terrorist attack on Times Square. That is not a sentence that should make sense, but in the spring of 2010, it did. That is how far the consequences of the 200 and 201 controversy extended. Not just into the realm of television censorship, but into the realm of national security. Parker and Stone have never publicly addressed the Times Square connection. They have never said whether they were aware of the speculation at the time or how it affected them personally. They have continued to make South Park as if nothing happened, which is either an act of extraordinary courage or extraordinary stubbornness, or both. The Times Square incident was ultimately unrelated to South Park, but it serves as a final reminder of the stakes involved. These were not abstract debates about free speech and censorship. These were real security concerns involving real law enforcement responses to real threats. The people who pulled the episodes from streaming were not acting out of cowardice. They were acting out of a genuine, evidence-based assessment that hosting the content posed a security risk to their employees and their operations. Whether that assessment was correct, whether the risk was proportionate to the response, whether the precedent set by the censorship was more dangerous than the content itself, these are questions that do not have easy answers. They are questions that scholars, journalists, and free speech advocates will continue to debate for as long as the episodes remain offline. What is not debatable is the outcome. 5 episodes removed, 1 uncensored version locked away. A hierarchy of censorship demonstrated in real time. And a show that keeps going, saying everything it wants to say about everything in the world, except for one thing it has chosen never to say again. That is the complete story. Every lost episode, every banned scene, every controversy. 3 hours of South Park lore from the first episode to the most recent season, from the construction paper shorts to the billion-dollar streaming deals, from an innocent depiction of Muhammad as a superhero in 2001 to the permanent erasure of 5 episodes from the show's official catalog. Thank you for watching. Subscribe if you want more.